Chapter 46:15. Humph. Xiaohua snorted and said indifferently, "It's just a temporary imperial artifact. How can it be compared to my Daoist artifact?" "You're right, fellow Daoist." Wen Chu nodded and said, "The garrison order, the troop concealing flag, the troop gathering drum, and the troop withdrawal gong are the 4 ancient imperial artifacts recorded in the history books of Confucian cultivators. If I'm not mistaken, they're all in the hands of the 4 great families." 200,000 disciples of the Baiming family flew out from the garrison order and formed a team. True energy and rosy clouds surged out from the disciples and condensed into a snowy plum blossom in the air. These 200,000 disciples of the Baiming family surrounded the other side of the Fortune Gate's disciples under the command of their commander. The momentum was terrifying. Ha! Xiaohua laughed loudly. He raised a finger and pointed at the Kunlun mirror, saying, "So, the 4 big families are really planning to destroy my Fortune Gate. It looks like this war will not end until one side is dead. Good, since that's the case, this old man will not hold back today and let you see the strength of my Fortune Gate's disciples." Boom boom boom. Several light pillars rushed out from the Kunlun mirror. Roar roar roar. Another team of Fortune Gate's disciples roared and rushed out from the Xinhua continent. This team of disciples was different from the previous ones. When they rushed into the sky, they condensed into the shape of a rooster. It was the plentiful sun devil devouring immortal array. This. Baiming Chui Qing was stunned. He was not surprised that Xiaohua could take out more disciples, but the immortal array formed by these disciples. This plentiful sun devil devouring immortal array was young. Lightning surged around the Fortune Gate's disciples, and the soaring aura was like the scorching sun pouncing on the Baiming family. The snowy plum blossom was already showing signs of withering. Baiming Chui Qing's shock was destined to not stop. When the 200,000 disciples lined up neatly, the murderous aura was like an unsheathed sword. He could not help but whisper, "Damn it, how many nascent soul disciples does the Fortune Gate have? Didn't they say there were 200,000? How come there are 400,000 now? Are my eyes playing tricks on me?" Shimen Jinzhong sneered. He also raised his hand and took out an ancient copper gong from somewhere. The copper gong was engraved with many armor inscriptions. These armor inscriptions glowed like silver orchids. Shimen Jinzhong didn't say anything. He flicked his middle finger and hit the gong. Bang! A soft sound was heard. The inscriptions on the gong began to move along with the sound of the gong. Rays of light gushed out from the surface of the gong and the inscriptions jumped down like fleas. When these inscriptions landed in the air, they transformed into the disciples of the Shimen family wearing silver white armor. Ayo. The Shimen family disciples roared as they landed in the air. They flew out of Dawn and Dawn Cliff and quickly formed into battle squads. In the time it took to finish half a meal, the 200,000 members of the Shimen aristocratic family had formed into an orchid-like battle team. An elegant yet formless aura filled the air once again. Furthermore, this aura combined with the aura of the other battle squads and trapped Dawn Cliff firmly. Kill. Xiaohua raised his head and looked at the provocation and mockery in the eyes of the 4 great families' patriarchs. He coldly shouted a single word. The word "kill" turned into a ball of light and flew into the Kunlun mirror. Boom! Another pillar of light appeared and the Fortune Gate's battle squads rushed out once again. Heavens! Nangong Tianji looked at the Fortune Gate's disciples flying out like carps crossing the river and couldn't help but groan. Just how many disciples does this Fortune Gate have? When I saw that the profound yellow board was filled with Fortune Gate's disciples, I was already shocked. However, when I heard that they had 200,000 disciples sweeping through the 1,000 demons' sacred grounds, I was even more shocked. Now, they have 600,000 disciples. 600,000 nascent soul realm disciples. This. Nangong Tianji didn't know how to continue. He couldn't help but look at Dongfang Qianghao. He knew that a battle squad of 600,000 nascent soul realm disciples was enough to wipe out the 100 schools of philosophers from the hidden immortal continent. Even the four great families weren't willing to provoke such a powerful opponent. Dongfang Qionghao's eyes narrowed slightly. The brilliant young eyes hidden in his eyes couldn't help but shine like the sun. The shock in his heart wasn't any less than Nangong Tianji and the others. He had already known about Xiao Hua's rise from his family's secret report. Moreover, he had also carefully read all the information about Xiao Hua. Of course, he didn't know much more than Fairy Xingyu. Although the Dongfang family's ability to gather information was stronger than star-picking houses. In Dongfang Qionghao's eyes, although Xiao Hua was powerful, he was the same as the Grand Mist Ancestor and the other powerful Dao sect cultivators on the hidden immortal continent. In terms of individual strength, he was close to the peak of the 9th grade. However, in terms of the strength of his sect, each and every one of them was weak. Dongfang Qiongghao and the patriarchs of the four great families had the same countermeasure to deal with this kind of Dao sect cultivator. After all, the purpose of a cultivator's cultivation was to ascend. When one reached the final step of cultivation, no one would be willing to risk their lives. As long as they didn't lose face, they wouldn't kill fiercely. Although this kind of cultivator was fierce, in the end, if it wasn't for the fact that their lifespan was limited and they couldn't break through the bottleneck, they would die of old age. Otherwise, they would be killed by the four great families. After all, a person's energy was limited. It was impossible to be vigilant against tens of thousands of disciples at all times. However, when Dongfang Qiongghao heard that Xiao Hua had 200,000 disciples, he couldn't sit still. 200,000 nascent soul disciples. Not 2,000, but 200,000. This was something that had never happened on the hidden immortal continent. There had never been a Dao sect with 200,000 disciples on the hidden immortal continent. In particular, Dongfang Qiongghao could see that the Fortune Gate had a close relationship with the Immortal Palace. Whether it was to destroy the Dao sect or to limit the Immortal Palace's strength, the four great families couldn't let the Fortune Gate continue to exist on the hidden immortal continent. Therefore, after receiving Nangong Tianji's message, he made the decision today. However, the patriarchs of the four great families, including Dongfang Qiongghao, didn't expect that the previously unknown Xiao Hua had already surpassed their expectations. Although they had already mobilized 200,000 disciples from their respective sects to surround the Fortune Gate's 200,000 disciples and annihilate them, Xiao Hua's Kunlun mirror gave them a resounding slap in the face. Today, not only would they not be able to defeat Xiao Hua, they would most likely be defeated. Since they had already come to this point, Dongfang Qiongghao couldn't retreat. He raised his hand and took out a fist-sized drum and threw it into the air. Dong! As Dongfang Qiongghao spat out a stream of qi on the drum, the small drum suddenly expanded and turned into a light projection that resembled a city gate. Kill! Waves of battle cries rang out from the city gate. Groups of Dongfang family's disciples in golden armor flew out valiantly. When these disciples stood still outside the cliff, there were at least 300,000 of them. The army formed by these 300,000 disciples was similar to the three aristocratic families from before, also in the shape of a bamboo flower. Their golden brilliance was mixed with soaring battle intent as they charged towards Xiao Hua's Chaomuya. However, Xiao Hua, who was standing on Chaomu Cliff, didn't activate the Kunlun mirror. Instead, he frowned and whispered to Wen Chu beside him. There was a trace of anxiety on Wen Chu's face. Strong on the outside but weak on the inside. Dongfang Qiongghao coldly snorted and ordered, Jianzhong, Tianji, Cui Qing, prepare yourselves. Don't let the Palace of Literature's master escape. In today's battle, not only will we destroy the Fortune Gate and dispel the North Star's delusion, but we will also leave behind the 5 Qi unification art. After the three great families' patriarchs responded and Dongfang Qiongghao was about to give the order, Xiao Hua, who was standing on Chaomu Cliff, seemed to have noticed something different. He casually raised his hand again. Boom! The Kunlun mirror rumbled again and groups of Fortune Gate's disciples flew out again. Dongfang Qiongghao was dumbfounded, Shimen Jianzhong was dumbfounded, Nangong Tianji was dumbfounded, and Baiming Cui Qing was dumbfounded. The 4 Fortune Gate disciples' eyeballs spun rapidly as they watched the Fortune Gate disciples fly out one after another. They were still calculating how many Fortune Gate disciples would fly out, but when they saw more than a dozen Fortune Gate disciples flying out, the 4 Fortune Gate disciples completely gave up. Dongfang Qionghao's gaze swept across Shimen Jianzhong and the other 2. His eyes were filled with shock and regret. The 300,000 Fortune Gates disciples not only consisted of humans but also dragons. A total of 300,000 disciples formed a heart-cleansing winnowing basket formation. A huge shadow of a leopard appeared in the sky above the battlefield. Layers of air currents surged in the sky. The shadow seemed to be alive as it roared and pounced on the bamboo flowers. The 900,000 disciples from the 4 great families and Fortune Gates disciples had already caused a change in the weather. The morning and evening lights began to sway under the rapid absorption of the righteous energy and heaven and earth origin energy. Even the 2 Qiaomu cliffs that stood tall like jade pillars were swaying. Needless to say, the sea of clouds at the bottom of the abyss seemed to be stirred up by a giant hand. Strange hissing sounds could be heard as if a powerful monster was howling at the bottom of the abyss. This. Seeing that their advantage in numbers was gone, Dongfang Qiongghao hesitated. In his life, he had never hesitated as much as he did today. Even when facing immortal Emperor Go Chen, he was calm. He had lost his usual decisiveness. My sons. While Dongfang Qiongghao was pondering, Xiaohua raised his head and looked at the patriarchs of the 4 great clans. His eyes flashed with deep mockery. Xiaohua raised his hand again and shouted, "The immortal palace has been shaken by your might after you all cleared the Confucian cultivators' Xianhuang list. However, the 4 great families still have the intention to destroy my Fortune Gate. Today, you even set up a battle formation at the Qiaomu Cliffs to kill my Fortune Gate. Everyone, listen to my command. If people don't offend me, I won't offend them. If people offend me, I will definitely retaliate. Kill." Chapter 46:16. Kill. 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 The 4 battle teams shouted the word "kill" repeatedly. Every time they shouted, the morale of the Fortune Gate disciples rose by a notch. After the 4th shout, the 900,000 Fortune Gate disciples' morale soared. The 4 battle teams charged towards the 4 families' battle teams. Dongfang Qiongghao was filled with regret, but he didn't have time to say anything. He raised his hand and tapped on the drum, causing it to soar into the sky again. Dong dong dong. The sound of the drum resounded through the sky. Kill. Following Dongfang Qionghao's command, the 4 flowers moved, emitting a dazzling light as they pounced on the Fortune Gate's disciples in the form of rabbits, golden crows, leopards, and roosters. As soon as the 2 sides' disciples came into contact with each other, a thunderous boom rang out, and light and cloud splashed in all directions. Xiaohua glanced at Wen Chu and said, "Fellow immortal, earlier, the 200,000 Fortune Gates disciples swept through the 1,000 Beasts sacred grounds, several hundred high-grade disciples cleaned up the mysterious yellow list, and the soaring dragon mountain ranges Shao country established their country were all to intimidate ordinary Confucian cultivators, so that they wouldn't dare to underestimate our Fortune Gates disciples. Today, our 900,000 Fortune Gates disciples are fighting against the 4 families. This is the time for our Fortune Gate to establish our might on the hidden immortal mainland. After this battle, our Fortune Gate will be like the scorching noon sun, shining with invincible brilliance and looking down on the 3 continents." Sigh. Wen Chu also felt pity at this time. Looking at the 2 sides fighting, there were already people screaming and falling into the abyss. He said, "I still underestimated the human heart and humanity. I really didn't expect that there would be such a big battle today. Maybe there will be a fierce battle at the soaring Dragon Mountain Range. It doesn't matter." Xiaohua smiled faintly and said, "Even if there is a fierce battle, 100,000 disciples and fellow immortal Feng are enough. I don't believe that the 4 families have the strength to spare to attack the soaring Dragon Mountain Range." Wen Chu nodded and said, "Their goal is the 5-Qi unification technique, so there shouldn't be any problems. Fellow immortals, it's time to come out and meet the 4 most ancient families on the hidden immortal mainland." Xiaohua raised his hand and pointed at the Kunlun mirror. The lightning Daoist and celestial being flew out of the light pillar. Xiaohua smiled and said, I'm afraid these two fellow immortals won't be able to hide from the eyes and ears of the four families. Greetings, fellow Daoist. The Thunderbolt Reverend and the Celestial landed in midair. However, they instantly understood the current situation of the battle. The Thunderbolt Reverend and the Celestial cupped their hands and bowed. This poor Daoist truly did not expect that the four great clans would actually want to attack first. After Xiaohua and Wen Chu returned the greeting, they smiled and said, I'll have to trouble the two of you again today. Daring to have designs on my fortune gate, daring to disturb I's cultivation, all of them deserve to die. The Celestial being spat viciously, may I know which one friend wants me to kill? Let's go, we'll go take a look. We'll kill whoever suits our tastes. Xiaohua smiled and flew out of Chao Muya. Seeing Xiaohua and the other three flying out, the patriarchs of the four great families also flew out on clouds. However, right after the four of them flew out, more than 10 white-haired old men also flew out. These old men were dressed differently, following behind different patriarchs. Obviously, they belonged to different families. A 9th grade origin energy literature saint? Xiaohua exclaimed in shock when he saw these old men. Is there really a literature saint with strength comparable to a literature star in this world? Wen Chu didn't find it strange at all. He said indifferently, the true cultivation system of us Confucian cultivators is to refine essence into qi, refine qi into spirit, refine spirit into the void, and refine the void into the heavens. The so-called scholar, master of literature, grandmaster, great-grandmaster, literature saint, and literature star are just some titles. They are different from the Tao Gates Qi refining, foundation establishment, and nascent soul realms. As time passes, it's inevitable that people will misunderstand. A literature star is actually similar to a great sage in the Thousand Demons' sacred ground. Without great fortune, one can't be called a literature star. As for fortune, the 100 schools of thought should have their own secrets, not to mention the four great families. Every generation's patriarch would become a literature star. But what about those literature saints who are not weaker than the patriarchs? Although they don't have any fortune, they can still cultivate. Refining the heavens and refining the void doesn't care if you have the merit of teaching them. So what if they are 9th-level literature saints? The Celestial sneered, they are just some middle-level 9th-level Confucian cultivators. Wen Chu glanced at him. The Celestial replied, but what if 4 or 5 middle-level 9th-level Confucian cultivators and 1 upper-level 9th-level Confucian cultivator attack you? Kill them all. The Celestial spat out 3 words. However, after a moment, he turned around and asked, fellow Daoist Xiao, can I borrow your disciple's weapon? Xiaohua understood that the Celestial was talking about Yuanya's bone spear. He smiled and said, of course. Yuanya is also your disciple. The Celestial nodded. I know. After the Celestial finished speaking, Xiaohua waved his hand and took out the bone spear. The Celestial took the bone spear and waved it in the air. Swoosh. A wave of demonic qi surged out from the bone spear. The roar of the bone dragon came from the depths of the demonic qi. Damn it. Dongfang Qionghao's heart tightened when he saw the Celestial take out the bone spear. He subconsciously looked at Shimen Jinzhong and the others. The 4 of them exchanged glances and shook their heads. Forget it. Dongfang Qionghao gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, today. I'm afraid that the Fortune Gate's reputation will be ruined. Our 4 great families will be humiliated. Nangong Tianji's mouth was filled with bitterness. He looked at Xiaohua who was flying over proudly and remained silent for a long time. The Nangong family was about to lose more than the other 3 great families. Not necessarily. Baiming Cho Qing was unwilling to give up. Our goal is not to fight. Today, we only need to capture the Literature Palace Master and it will be a complete victory. That's right. Shimen Jinzhong gritted his teeth and said, exchanging 900,000 disciples for the 5 Qis unification technique is worth it. Good. Dongfang Qianghao also made a decision in his heart. He waved his hand and said, since that's the case, we will act according to the plan. Don't let Gaochen see any flaws. Xiaohua, Wenchu, Lightning Daoist, and the Celestial had already met up with Dongfang Qianghao, Shimen Jinzhong, Nangang Tianji, and Baiming Chou Qing. The abyss between the dawn and dusk cliff was different from the two sides of the dawn and dusk cliff. The void overlapped and compressed together like soft straw. Strands of black and white clouds with the aura of the stars and moon wandered freely in this unstable space. The wind in the sky was more biting cold than ordinary space. Wherever the wind blades landed, even the rocks would be cut open. Xiaohua and the others' divine senses were not obstructed at this high altitude. When their divine senses swept through the space, they could even create layers of ripples. More than 20 supreme cultivators of hidden immortal continent had already spread out, standing high up in the sky. Their expressions were like water. Sounds of fighting, screams, and the sound of magical treasures and imperial tools colliding with each other faintly came from under everyone's feet. Kill. It seemed that they had already said too much. At this point, both sides no longer had any extra words to say. Xiaohua and Dongfang Qianghao's gazes met, and sparks seemed to appear in the air. The two of them roared in unison and flew out. However, Dongfang Qianghao glanced at Xiaohua coldly. His figure flashed, and in a flash, he passed by Xiaohua and pounced on Wenchu. In the eyes of the arrogant Dongfang Qianghao, only the master of the Wenchu palace was his real opponent. As for Xiaohua, he could only leave it to Nangang Tianji. Nangang Tianji, who had been planning for a long time, could finally face Xiaohua, who was about to trample on his sect's face. His eyes were already red. Xiaohua sneered. Why would he care who his opponent was? Since the Nangang family had delivered themselves to his door, he was also overjoyed. Lightning flashed around Xiaohua's body as he used the Heavenly Law's embodiment technique. His golden body, which was several thousand feet tall, was formed. He immediately clenched his right fist and smashed it towards Nangang Tianji. Nangang Tianji didn't show any signs of weakness. When he saw Xiaohua activating his avatar, he also opened his mouth. Roar. Dozens of vast chi pillars fell from the sky and smashed onto his body. Nangang Tianji also activated his avatar and chased after Xiaohua. The few Wen saints behind Nangang Tianji were also arrogant. They activated their avatar and surrounded Xiaohua. Then, they waved their fists and legs and pounced on Xiaohua. Boom. Xiaohua's fist collided with Nangang Tianji's fist. A huge shockwave surged out. Xiaohua staggered under the force of Nangang Tianji's fist. He seemed to have lost his balance. The few Wen saints who were pouncing on Xiaohua actually swayed slightly. However, the multicolored light around them flickered. They received the impact and attacked Xiaohua's back. Bang, bang, bang. Although Xiaohua was in a sorry state, he still tried his best to raise his leg. With a flash of golden light, an illusory figure appeared like a wave and kicked the bodies of the Wen saints. When the Wen saints saw that Xiaohua's fists and legs were not a match for Nangang Tianji, they sneered in their hearts. They waved their fists and legs towards Xiaohua. Bang, bang, bang. Several gusts of wind rose again. Xiaohua's golden body was sent flying in the air by the two Wen saints. However, the two Wen saints' avatars did not have any special changes. Following Xiaohua's retreat, the other Wen saints had already arrived. Their fists landed on Xiaohua's back. With a flash of golden light on Xiaohua's back, a powerful rebounding force rushed out. The two Wen saints actually staggered. However, the radiance on Xiaohua's back did not even dim in the slightest. Seeing that Xiaohua's fists and legs were ordinary, but his golden body was indeed extremely powerful, Nangang Tianji sucked in a breath of cold air. He knew that he might not be able to gain the upper hand in a physical fight. Thus, he raised his hand and slapped his own head. Boom. A mottled five-colored true chi surged out. Similarly, the Wen saints did not dare to fight Xiaohua head-on. They also raised their hands and slapped their own heads. Several streams of four-colored true qi gushed out and transformed into several large hands that fell down. Oh my! The four great families indeed live up to their reputation. Although Nangong Tianji's five-colored large hands were somewhat impure, the large hands that were formed were as hard as jade. They were even more powerful than Wen Chu's five-colored large hands. Xiaohua could not help but praise this true qi transformation technique. I'm afraid that there are very few people in the world who can compare to it. Chapter 46:17. Several large hands fell down, tearing the void apart. The power of space firmly confined Xiaohua within a few dozen miles. Not to mention escaping, even the wind had to stop. This spatial energy was completely controlled by the Nangong families Wen sages and Wen Chu, who were at the 9th grade of essence energy. Good, watch this Zhao's move. Xiaohua was not afraid at all. He roared and slapped his head. Boom, boom, boom. Several thunderous roars rang out, and lightning spewed out like a tidal wave. It condensed into a giant lightning hand in the air and grabbed at the five-colored giant hands. Kacha! Swoosh! Under Xiaohua's thunderous giant hand, the Nangong family's giant hands all stopped. The true energy and inscriptions that were previously flowing like flood dragons were now as stiff as dead snakes. No matter how hard Nangong Tianji and the others tried to activate them, they still couldn't do as they wished. A kind of deathly aura that was like autumn frost directly passed through the giant hands and spread towards everyone's bodies. Damn it! Nangong Tianji roared. He opened his mouth, and a mouthful of true qi fell into the giant hands. At the same time, several Wen saints followed suit and spat out their true qi. As their true qi fell into the giant hands expanded and clashed with Xiaohua's lightning hand. The lightning was like a flood dragon, crazily pouncing on the giant hands, while the true qi was like a dragon, fiercely counterattacking. The battle between the Nangong families Wen Chu had already affected the surrounding several hundred li. When Xiaohua and Nangong Tianji made their move, they had already flown up carefully, trying their best not to affect the disciples under them. However, the spatial storm still came crashing down like waves, and thousands of disciples were swept into it. Whether it was the capital Heavenly Star Formation or the Nangong family's battle formation, they were all messed up. Some disciples were even accidentally thrown into the abyss. The Fortune Gate's disciples were better off. After all, some of them had experienced the battle between humans and devils, and they often used some methods to train their disciples. These methods were all stored in the Fortune Gate's training grounds on the Xinhua continent. Of course, these training grounds were built by the Lightning Daoist himself. On the Xinhua continent, the Lightning Daoist and Jade Archive Xiaohua were close to gods. They could do a lot for the Fortune Gate's disciples, and many of them were close to the laws of heaven and earth. Therefore, the Fortune Gate's method of training disciples was far superior to the four big families. This was also the reason why the Xinhua continent was able to produce an unstoppable army. What's more, the disciples that the four great clans brought out were mostly their hidden strength. Not to mention that there weren't many soldiers in the hidden immortal continent, there were very few large-scale battles. These disciples themselves had even less experience in battles. This battle highlighted one of the Fortune Gate's disciples' strengths, and that was their ability to survive in a battle between two extremely powerful masters. The Fortune Gate's disciples split into groups of 3 to 5, supporting each other as they tried to escape from the storm's range. Even if they couldn't escape, they remained calm, waiting for an opportunity to escape as their bodies plummeted to the ground. There were even some who were even bolder and actually used the spatial storm to attack the disciples of the four great clans. It was just this little bit of experience and training. After the spatial storm, the disciples of the four great clans had already lost quite a few. Nangong Tianji and the others naturally didn't care about the lives of the disciples within several hundred li of them. Not only did the five-colored giant hand tear the space apart, even the faintly discernible earth, fire, wind, lightning, and other auras in the sky were torn apart. It was as if the sky was collapsing, and the entire space smashed towards Xiaohua. Looking at Xiaohua's lightning giant hand, the 5 fingers were already different in color, and the entire hand was filled with lightning. Although it wasn't as condensed as Nangong Tianji's 5-colored giant hand, it was superior in terms of the purity of the lightning, and the momentum of the lightning was terrifying. Seeing the lightning hand wave, the space between Xiaohua and the hand was immediately sucked dry. Countless hurricanes and indescribable fluctuations rushed out from the torn space, violently pouncing towards Xiaohua. This storm, which could instantly kill an ordinary cultivator, fell on Xiaohua's golden body, but it only set off some ripples of golden light. Boom, boom, boom. The thunderous hand clashed with several 5-colored hands, and a destructive aura that was even more powerful than the collapse of the heavens and the earth rose from the sky. The thunderous hand was shattered, and countless thunderbolts flew in all directions, smashing into the void and shattering it. The 5-colored hands were also torn apart, and the translucent jade-like hands turned into countless fragments. Countless fragments also turned into fragmented aura and disappeared into the void. Violent gales rose, and the storm rolled. Within 1,000 li, the wind and clouds surged. Even someone as strong as Nangong Tianji staggered, and the protective light around his body was also blown away like a candle in the wind. With Nangong Tianji in such a state, those 9th-grade essence energy literary saints were even more embarrassed. Their bodies lost their balance, and they quickly rushed out of the storm. These literary saints were also shocked. Just a casual clash of divine abilities could cause such a huge commotion, and Xiaohua actually didn't fall into a disadvantageous position even when fighting against so many of them. This was something they really didn't expect. However, in this world, there were only more surprises, but no more surprises. Just as they were about to get out of the range of the storm, suddenly, a light figure rushed out from the lightning fragments. Xiaohua's tall and thin figure actually went against the wind, and with the help of the wind, he instantly appeared in front of them. What is this guy doing? The cultivation method of the literary saints of Confucianism was different from that of the Taoism cultivators. They had always emphasized practicing. Moreover, the true 5 Qis unification technique was to refine the 5 viscera and 6 bowels. The cultivation methods of the 4 major families were incomplete, but there were more or less traces of the true cultivation methods. Therefore, most of the disciples of the 4 major families would refine their bodies while refining their qi. When these literary saints saw Xiaohua suddenly appear, they were surprised, but they weren't particularly afraid. In fact, they were even a little confused. After all, they believed that the cultivation of their physical bodies was definitely stronger than that of the Taoism cultivators of the same level. Moreover, Xiaohua didn't gain any advantage when he was surrounded by so many people. Instead, he seemed to be losing. Seeing Xiaohua's figure appear, he waved his fist, and like several phantoms, he landed on several literary saints. These literary saints' hearts were filled with disdain, and the same thought emerged from the bottom of their hearts: damn it. My divine abilities may not be as powerful as a human Mahayana stage cultivator, but didn't we already see the power of my fists and feet? It's just that I'm a little stronger and my skin is thicker. Therefore, while these literary saints were on guard against Xiaohua's backup plan, they also slacked off and swung their fists and legs to meet the enemy. There was even a literary saint who actually used the eye-clearing technique to test the strength of this punch. In the distance, Nangong Tianji also ignored Xiaohua's sudden intrusion, and a mocking smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Amidst the fierce wind, his figure strangely flashed with multicolored light, turning into a distorted light shadow, and rushed behind Xiaohua like lightning, preparing to gang up on Xiaohua with the other literary saints. As expected, Xiaohua's fist collided with the fist of one of the literary saints. Boom! A sound that wasn't very loud rang out. Wen Sheng, who had a smile on his face, suddenly had a change in expression the instant his fist came into contact with Xiaohua's fist. This was because he saw that Xiaohua's fist had suddenly shrunk, and a black halo of light had unexpectedly appeared in the air. Not good. Wen Sheng, who was proficient in body cultivation, immediately sensed that something was wrong from the force of the fist coming into contact with Xiaohua's fist, and an unavoidable feeling arose spontaneously. However, before he could open his mouth to warn the others, Xiaohua's fist had already landed. The sound of the explosion wasn't loud, but the power was extremely great. Nangong Tianji and the others could see that the literary saint's sub-body, starting from the fist, followed by his arm, all the way until half of his sub-body collapsed with a loud bang, and countless inscriptions were annihilated in the collapse. In this collapse, the noble qi turned into a vortex, and pieces of flesh and blood burst out at the same time. On the side of the collapsed sub-body and physical body of the literary saint, more than 10 layers of space appeared, and the flesh and blood of the literary saint were swallowed by the void, and could no longer be recovered. Damn it! Seeing the power of Xiao Hua's fist, Nangong Tianji cursed inwardly. He realized that Xiao Hua's previous move was just a tactic to lure the enemy. He hurriedly sped up and sent out a palm strike, wanting to attract Xiao Hua's attention. Unfortunately, just as Nangong Tianji came to his senses, Xiao Hua's fist wind pounced towards the other literary saint. That literary saint had long been scared witless after seeing the power of Xiao Hua's fist. He didn't dare to take Xiao Hua's fist head-on, and tried to move his body to dodge. It was also at this moment, woo. The sound of the wind rose again, and under the body of the literary saint, Xiao Hua's leg stretched out from the void, and kicked the waist of the literary saint. The strength of a leg has always surpassed the wind of a fist. When Xiao Hua's leg landed, the sub-body of the literary saint collapsed bit by bit, and an oval-shaped black hole fell into the body of the literary saint. Ah! The literary saint screamed miserably, and a bloody light appeared at the collapsed area again. His sub-body rapidly shrank, and his physical body was almost cut in half. At the same time that Xiao Hua succeeded in killing the second literary saint, Nangong Tianji's palm also arrived. Contrary to Nangong Tianji's expectations, Xiao Hua didn't dodge at all. Seeing Xiao Hua so confident, Nangong Tianji suddenly thought of the situation when Xiao Hua was hit by the two literary saints, and he couldn't help but feel that things were not good. Pa! Another loud sound rang out. Nangong Tianji's palm was indeed accumulating strength. If a mountain was here, it would probably be pushed down by his palm. Xiao Hua wasn't a mountain, and naturally, he couldn't block Nangong Tianji's palm. However, Xiao Hua's golden body was sent flying by Nangong Tianji's palm. Xiao Hua's golden body instantly collapsed, and the golden light was quickly extinguished. Xiao Hua's figure actually pounced on the third literary saint. How could Nangong Tianji not know Xiao Hua's plan? The tricks that ordinary martial artists often used in the competition were actually used by the Daoist sect's Grand Ascension stage cultivators in this supreme battle. This was not only beyond Nangong Tianji's expectations, but it was also out of Nangong Tianji's expectations. Nangong Tianji couldn't help but gnash his teeth and say, "Damn it." Borrowing strength to fight strength. Chapter 46:18. Of course, Nangong Tianji's curiosity was piqued. After all, he knew the strength of his palm. Even if immortal Emperor Go Qin was here, he wouldn't dare to let his palm land on his body. Unless it was the 7 great sages from the Great Sage Hall. At the thought of this, Nangong Tianji suddenly realized something and shouted, "Pingu, retreat. This bastard's body is extremely strong, don't." Nangong Tianji originally wanted to say, "Don't let him get close," but he was only halfway through when Xiao Hua had already forced himself to the side of the literature sage named Nangong Pingu. This literature sage, who had just used the clear eyes technique to probe the strength of Xiao Hua's fist, had only blocked Xiao Hua's left fist, and was immediately hit in the shoulder by Xiao Hua's right fist. Boom! Another muffled sound rang out. Nangong Pingu's sub-body began to collapse from the shoulder. In an instant, the sub-body was shattered, and even the body below the sub-body was affected. Blood and flesh flew everywhere. However, Nangong Pingu, who was about to faint from the pain, stared at Xiao Hua, who was soaring into the sky. His eyes were filled with confusion. This was because he could clearly see that the fist that was about to strike his heart had swerved slightly and was now aiming for his shoulder. The fact that he hadn't been killed on the spot wasn't because he was lucky, nor was it because he had managed to evade in time. Instead, it was because this Grand Ascension stage Daoist was holding back. Seeing the 3 9th grade sage of origin energy being killed or injured by Xiao Hua in just a few rounds, Nangong Tianji's heart ached as if it was being stabbed by a knife. He knew very well in his heart, which of those Confucian cultivators who were able to cultivate to the 9th grade of origin energy did not possess supreme skills. Although these great sage halls were not great sage hall. Even if they were facing immortal Emperor Go Qin, they wouldn't be injured in just a few rounds. This was also the reason why he, as the patriarch of the 4 great clans, was not worried about letting these 9th grade great sage hall fight. However, Nangong Tianji didn't expect Xiao Hua's great sage hall to be able to flatten a mountain with a single punch. As a result, these 3 9th grade literary saints were killed and injured by Xiao Hua before they could even use the true divine arts of the Confucian cultivators. This purely physical injury was even more severe than Daoist magic power. Even though Xiao Hua didn't take Nangong Pinga's life today, it would be difficult for this 9th grade essence force literary sage to advance his cultivation in the future. Even one's lifespan would be affected. Xiao Hua, this old man will not rest until you die. Nangong Tianji's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He roared as he raised his hand and slapped the top of his head again. Rumbling sounds could be heard from Nangong Tianji's body. Ripples of space surged out from his body. Sharp, bird-like whistling sounds could be heard from the top of his head. Xiao Hua originally wanted to continue chasing after the 2 remaining saints of literature, but when he saw the white hair of the 2 saints of literature running away and Nangong Tianji challenging them, he stopped in the air and turned around coldly. He looked at the rapidly swaying earth, fire, wind, and thunder in the sky and laughed. Won't stop until one of us dies? What a joke. Nangong Tianji, you're thinking too much. You don't have the qualifications to fight with me until one of us dies. When Nangong Tianji heard Xiao Hua's words, even though he knew that Xiao Hua was trying to provoke him, he was still so angry that his lungs were about to explode. Pooh! Nangong Tianji roared angrily. He opened his mouth again, and a 5-colored pillar of air shot out from his mouth. It shot straight up into the sky and pierced into the earth, fire, wind, and thunder. Boom! The earth, fire, wind, and thunder let out a loud explosion. Countless wind and thunder fell into the 5-colored pillar of light like a heavenly river bursting through a dam. At this moment, above Nangong Tian's son's head, a similar pillar of energy shot out. This pillar of energy wasn't 5-colored, but golden. Hundreds of millions of inscriptions surged out like golden chrysanthemums, enveloping the surrounding several hundred miles. The golden chrysanthemums were like a vast river. Wherever the earth, fire, wind, and lightning fell, all of the golden chrysanthemums transformed. Under the cover of the river, the space was completely locked down. All of the noble energy and the world's origin energy melted away. Even within Xiao Hua's divine sense, the 5 elements of heaven and earth began to change. Faint rays of light began to shoot out in all directions, swaying in all directions within the space. Nangong Tianji laughed sinisterly. He watched as Xiao Hua's golden body was covered by countless tiny rays of light. It was as if he had fallen into a net. He shouted proudly, "Xiao Hua, today this old man will let you see what the true noble Qi River is." As Nangong Tianji's voice fell, the earth, fire, wind, and thunder in the sky turned into aurora magnetism through the golden chrysanthemum. Under the aurora magnetism, the space within 1,000 miles was filled with dazzling sparks. The entire space was filled with strange laws. Under this strange light, Xiao Hua's face also revealed a strange smile. The righteous spirit river of Confucian cultivators had always been a divine ability that Xiao Hua highly praised. Under the righteous spirit river, the righteous spirit would envelop the space, and any evil force would be destroyed by this righteous spirit. However, although Nangong Tianji's noble Qi River was several times stronger than an ordinary noble Qi River, even someone as strong as Xiao Hua could feel the sharpness of the aurora magnetism. Xiao Hua didn't doubt that if this river-like aurora magnetism fell, his golden body would definitely be riddled with holes. Even his nascent soul might not be able to escape the fate of being killed. It could be said that the noble Qi River was the true nemesis of Taoism cultivators. Unfortunately, Nangong Tianji met Xiao Hua. Seeing the smile on Xiaohua's face, which contained a thick sense of ridicule, Nangong Tianji's heart thumped. He couldn't help but look into the distance. Just as Nangong Tianji felt that something was wrong, Xiaohua opened his mouth. Pooh! With a sound, the spirit-slaying sword gourd spat out from his mouth. Xiaohua raised his hand and pointed, and a thick crystal light fell into the sword gourd. Buzz buzz buzz. The sword gourd vibrated, and the spirit-slaying sword gourd soared into the sky. When the river-like aurora magnetism came into contact with the spirit-slaying sword gourd, it immediately seemed as if it had seen a long-lost relative. It rushed in without a care for its own safety, and had long forgotten Nangong Tianji's hospitality. This is. Nangong Tianji didn't expect that Xiaohua would be able to destroy the noble spirit river that he was so proud of with just a single magical treasure. Furthermore, the vast and mighty aurora magnetism didn't listen to his command at all. It gathered into two thick beams of light and went against the current, pouncing towards him like a huge dragon. Damn it! Nangong Tianji was shocked. The chrysanthemum and snowflakes above his head immediately retracted, and turned into a golden chrysanthemum cloud to protect him. Roar! At this moment, Dongfang Qionghao's roar sounded in the distant sky. Nangong Tianji was overjoyed. His figure flashed, and he teleported towards that direction. Want to leave? Xiaohua sneered. He waved his right hand again, and a ray of golden light flashed in the sky like a pair of scissors. It immediately slashed across Dongfang Qionghao's illusory figure. Swoosh! The illusory figure that had already turned into a distorted light was actually cut off by the soaring dragon scissors. The right leg of the illusory figure was cut off. Boom boom. The moment the right leg left the illusory figure, it immediately collapsed, and it turned into noble qi and runes that scattered in the sky. Roar! Nangong Tianji howled in grief, but he didn't stop. He continued to rush into the distance as if he had planned this beforehand. Humph! Xiaohua snorted coldly. He raised his head and looked at the spirit-slaying sword gourd circling above his head. He then lowered his head and sneered, "Since you want to destroy my fortune gate, then don't blame me for being merciless. Go." As Xiaohua raised his hand and pointed, two thick rays of spirit-slaying sword gourd turned into hundreds of thousands of light threads and crazily rained down. Countless miserable screams rang out from the sea of clouds. Each ray of light penetrated the body of an aristocratic family's disciple and directly pierced their dantian. Xiaohua wouldn't take their lives, but whether they could stay alive or not, that would depend on their own fortune. Just as Xiaohua was about to withdraw the spirit-slaying sword gourd, he heard a clear light in the distance, and another strange phenomenon appeared. Back to Xiaohua's battle against the Nangong family. The heaven expert flew out with his bone spear, but he was also blocked by Shimen Jinzhong and several 9th grade Essence Force saints. Hiss! The heaven expert swung his bone spear and raised his head to look into the distance. He roared, "Shimen Jinzhong, you are not my opponent, hurry up and get out of my way. I want to meet Dongfang Qionghao." Hee hee. Shimen Jinzhong sneered, and a cold light appeared around him. He said, "Your opponent is this old man, Wen Chu is Dongfang Qionghao's opponent. Of course, if you can defeat this old man, then you can go find Dongfang Qiionghao. However, this old man wants to see the origin of a Daoist cultivator who can fight evenly with the master of the Jade Pure Palace." After saying that, Shimen Jinzhong didn't hesitate. Inscriptions flickered all over his body, and clouds surged out. Thick awe-inspiring qi penetrated through the fragile void and fell on his body. Boom boom boom. Shimen Jinzhong's body trembled, and layers of sword light bloomed like flowers. Every layer of sword light was accompanied by a sword intent. It was either life and death, or austere, or bloody. This sword intent enveloped an area of several hundred li in just a moment. As this sword intent surged out, the bodies of the several saints of literature also glowed with sword light. Not to mention that their limbs were as sharp as flying swords, even the gaze in their eyes was like a sword. "Ha, so it's a sword cultivator." The heaven expert laughed and shouted, it's not like this old man hasn't fought with sword cultivators before. Come, fight with this old man for 300 rounds. As he spoke, the heaven expert's body swayed, and the blood light on the bone spear surged. A pitch-black demonic dragon emerged from the bone spear, roaring and pouncing towards Shimen Jinzhong. The awe-inspiring chi of the Confucian cultivators had always been the natural nemesis of the devil clan, but correspondingly, the devil chi and the awe-inspiring chi had been rivals since ancient times. Although Shimen Jinzhong activated his sword intent, the demonic dragon's bloody, murderous, and violent intent rushed into Shimen Jinzhong's defense and went straight into his heart. Give it a reward, and thank you for all your support. Chapter 46:19. Seeing that the celestial was so powerful, Shimen Jinzhong was also shocked. He thought to himself, damn it, how can this Taoist body cultivator have a demonic weapon? When he fought with the master of the Jade Pure Palace that day, he didn't use a weapon. Moreover, this demonic weapon is different from ordinary demonic weapons. The bone dragon that was refined into a demonic spear is not an ordinary dragon. The aura of this demonic weapon seems to be innately restraining the righteous aura of my Confucian cultivator. Today's battle seems to be too dangerous, far from what I expected. However, since he was already here, how could Shimen Jinzhong hesitate? He slowly raised his right hand, and a sword light appeared in his right palm like starlight. Then, countless sword cries came from the sword light, and a sword that was overflowing with brilliance began to expand rapidly. This old man will show you what the sword essence of heaven and earth is. Shimen Jinzhong roared proudly, and the huge sword that was 1,000 feet long fell like a falling mountain. The sword hair of the huge sword was like a flood dragon, and the sword essence was like a rainbow. Wherever it passed, the space was split open, the wind was split open, and even the eyes of the celestial were about to be split open. Near Shimen Jinzhong, the literary saints didn't dare to be careless. They opened their mouths at the same time, and a flying sword that looked like a hook rushed out and landed on the arm of the celestial. Wherever the sword light passed, the entire arm turned into a hook. Several people cooperated with Shimen Jinzhong, and as their bodies swayed, the hooks were like snow, attacking different parts of the celestial. Boom! In the roar, the bone spear pierced the sword light, and the sword light also split the demonic aura of the bone spear. Shimen Jinzhong was indeed the master of the Shimen family. Wherever the sword essence of heaven and earth fell, the demonic aura was split open, and the demons hidden in the demonic aura were all split in half. In the bloody light, the body of the bone spear was revealed, and a shallow notch appeared on the scales of the bone dragon's back. The gigantic sword formed by Shimen Jinzhong's sword beam was also swallowed by the bone dragon after it slashed down. Ka ka ka. With a crisp sound, the entire gigantic sword was shattered into pieces by the demonic light. Although each fragment struggled to transform into tens of thousands of small flying swords, before the flying swords could take form, they were shaken into inscriptions by the bone spear and scattered into the void. Ka ka ka. At the same time, several sounds of metal and stone rang out. Several sword shadows flashed past the celestial's back, waist, and ribs, and a series of golden lights splashed out. Ow ow. The celestial seemed to be in pain and roared in the air. That's all there is to it. Shimen Jinzhong looked up to the sky and laughed, saying, this old man thought you were very powerful, but it seems that you are just a guy who is strong in appearance but weak in reality. Maybe you have succeeded in refining your body, but in this old man's eyes, your body cultivation is just like grass. As he spoke, Shimen Jinzhong raised his hand and waved it from his waist. A thin blue light flashed, and a slender sword like an orchid appeared. Although the sword light was thin, it was very tough. When it landed in the void, it pierced through the void. What was special was that the sword was very soft, and it was like duckweed in the wind. It danced with the wind, and a sense of elegance and nobility spontaneously appeared. Shimen Jinzhong stared at the sword, and his eyes revealed eagerness, as if he had seen his long-lost lover. For a moment, Shimen Jinzhong raised his head and looked at the celestial who was also vigilant in his eyes. He said proudly, the Confucian scholars of the hidden immortal continent have long admired the gentle sword, but no one has ever heard of the Feather Orchid Immortal Sword of my Shiman family. Before the Feather Orchid Immortal Sword, the so-called number 1 imperial weapon is nothing but nothingness. All the families in the world know about the Son of Heaven's sword, and with the Son of Heaven's sword, you can stabilize the world. But who knows? If you control the Feather Orchid Sword, you can become an immortal. You are very lucky to be able to see the true appearance of the Feather Orchid Immortal Sword before you die. After speaking, Shiman Jianzhong raised his hand and waved. That sword, which was originally as soft as gossamer, suddenly gave birth to a resplendent sword light. Moreover, that sword directly soared into the sky, and an extraordinary sword intent rushed out from the sword. Wherever the sword intent passed, the broken void transformed into many orchids. Each orchid was born from the sword's splendor, and each orchid revealed a hazy world. Each orchid contained a heaven-destroying and earth-exterminating killing intent. Damn it! When the Celestial saw it, he couldn't help but turn pale with fright. The Celestial was formed by Xiao Hua's bone tempering. When it comes to the corporeal body, it is naturally tough and tenacious. It is very difficult for ordinary magic tools to injure him. Normally, the Celestial should be the most powerful one among Xiao Hua's clones, but in fact, the Celestial was the most awkward one. Previously, other than cultivating Xiao Hua's Big Dipper fist and several bone-tempering cultivation techniques, he didn't have any other cultivation techniques. Then, in Star Moon Palace, Xiao Hua found a cultivation technique for the Celestial and also found a secret technique to repair the 10,000 extinguishing Heavenly Dipper. However, the time was short and the Celestial didn't complete it. Therefore, when facing ordinary cultivators of the lower 9th grade, the Celestial had an absolute advantage. He could even deal with them more efficiently than Xiao Hua. However, when facing Shiman Jianzhong, who was also at the upper 9th grade, he was powerless. Seeing Shiman Jianzhong take out the Feather Orchid Immortal Sword, that bone-chilling sword light made his heart palpitate. Without hesitation, he waved his hand and summoned the Celestial's white bone. When the Celestial's white bone appeared, the space immediately began to flash with a pitch-black halo. A kind of rich desolate aura rushed out from the white bone. When the Celestial merged with the white bone, with a loud bang, the space within 100 miles began to tremble. Waves of energy wantonly swept out and merged with the desolate aura. Ao! The Celestial looked up to the sky and roared. A fierce aura emerged from his 3 heads. Waves of sound surged towards Shiman Jianzhong and the others. Ah! This is the ancient demon clan? Seeing that the Celestial had 3 heads and 6 arms and emitted a ferocious aura that could suppress the world, Shiman Jianzhong was astonished. He finally understood why the Celestial could fight evenly with the Jade Pure Palace Master. However, in the blink of an eye, Shiman Jianzhong sneered. Suddenly, tens of thousands of sword hairs appeared around his body. These sword hairs all rushed into the treasured sword in his hand. The slender treasured sword overflowed with brilliance like the rising sun. As Shiman Jianzhong waved his hands, the seemingly slender treasured sword fell down like a meteor. Amidst the huge rumbling sound, the space habitually shattered and collapsed. The orchid sword hairs from before floated down and pounced on the Celestial. The treasured sword was still far from the Celestial. In the sky above the Celestial's head, pa pa pa. Sounds of explosions suddenly sounded. Countless mighty pillars of qi were extinguished, and thumb-sized protrusions appeared around the Celestial. Looking at the other 4 sides of the sword light, the figures of the several saints of literature had already turned into swords and flew up like orchids. The sword intent that was several times stronger than before also pierced through the void and fell toward the back of the Celestial being. The demon-devouring spear is invincible. Kill Buddha if it meets Buddha, slay immortals if it meets immortals. The Celestial laughed boldly. You are just immortal ascension swords. How can you be a match for me? Roar. The Celestial opened his mouth and 3 pillars of light rushed out, passing through the sword qi and landing on Shiman Jianzhong's head. The bone spear in his hand, under the stimulation of the desolate qi, turned into a demon dragon that was thousands of feet long and crazily expanded to meet the treasured swords. Seeing the 3 pillars of light fall, Shimen Jinzhong did not care because the true qi around his body had already turned into sword hair and merged with the treasured swords. The Feather Orchid Immortal Ascension sword would naturally block the light pillars. However, contrary to Shimen Jinzhong's expectations, the Feather Orchid Immortal Ascension sword did not block the light pillars when they passed through the sword light. And in the light pillars, Shimen Jinzhong felt that his essence, qi, and spirit were about to leave his body. Not good. Shimen Jinzhong knew that things were not good and hurriedly urged his true qi to block the attacks of the three pillars of light. Shimen Jinzhong was distracted and the bone spear collided with the treasured swords again. The treasured swords shone brightly and the sword's momentum was like a wave. The bone spear's demonic qi soared into the sky and the spear's intent was like 1,000 caddies. The space within hundreds of miles shook at this moment. The worlds created by the sword hair were destroyed by the demonic qi, and the blood waves created by the demonic qi were also wiped out by the sword hair. This huge collision produced a vast impact. Not only did it blow away the flying swords that Shimen Jinzhong had transformed into, it also caused the corporeal body of the celestial being with 3 heads and 6 arms to tumble. Clang, clang, clang. As he tumbled, the sounds of swords humming could be heard. The flying swords that were formed by the sage of literature had slashed through the void and slashed at the celestial being's back. Out of the celestial being's expectations, several deep sword marks appeared on his back, and the eerie white bones were revealed in the sword marks. Roar. The celestial being roared. Other than the 2 hands that were holding the spear, the other 4 arms suddenly reached into the void. At the same time, the 3 heads opened their mouths and shot 3 pillars of light at the sage of literature who was closest to them. Dodge. Shimen Jinzhong's flying sword was raised, and his figure was naturally blocked. He saw the celestial being's arms falling into the void and immediately felt that something was wrong, so he hurriedly shouted. Moreover, he bent his body and forcefully channeled his sword. The sword turned into a ray of light and also disappeared into the void. The sage of literature who received the warning were alarmed and quickly dodged. Crack, crack, crack. Just as they were about to dodge, the celestial being's 4 arms reached out from the void and hit their shadows. With a crisp sound, several sword rays were shot down, and the sage of literature's secondary bodies were also slightly shattered. However, the sage of literature who was closest to the celestial was not so lucky. The 3 pillars of light worked together and struck the sage of literature's sword rays with lightning speed. The sage of literature didn't even have time to scream before the brilliance of his secondary body was instantly extinguished, and he fell from the sky. Poof. The celestial being succeeded, but Shimen Jinzhong's Feather Orchid Immortal Ascension sword also arrived at the same time. This sword that was even thinner than a thin thread easily pierced the celestial's heart and almost came out of his body. Good. The sage of literature couldn't help but cheer when he saw the celestial being stabbed. At this time, boom, boom. Behind the sage of literature, a violent wind suddenly rose. The celestial's hands that were holding the spear had unknowingly abandoned it and were now reaching out from the void and grabbing the backs of 2 sage of literatures. The 2 bloody hands even came out from the chests of 2 sage of literatures. Give it a tip, and thank you for all forms of support. Chapter 46:20. The celestial's other 2 legs didn't stay idle either. Like Xiao Hua, he kicked the other 2 literary saints in the back. After the 2 literary saints' backs caved in, they fell from the sky. Damn it. Shimen Jinzhong couldn't help but gnash his teeth when he saw the celestial kill 5 literary saints right in front of him. However, what surprised him even more was that there was no blood flowing out from where the Feather Orchid Immortal sword pierced. The celestial only gritted his teeth in pain but didn't seem to be killed at all. He growled, You. The celestial sneered and grabbed the sword in his chest. Can't you see that I have 3 heads and 6 arms? I have 3 hearts. The celestial grabbed the sword and thunder rumbled. The entire Feather Orchid Immortal sword was controlled by lightning. Shimen Jinzhong was shocked. He hurriedly waved his right hand and the flexible sword in the lightning turned into nothingness. Roar. At the same time, Dongfang Qionghao's roar came from the distant sky. Shimen Jinzhong was startled. He looked at the remaining literary saint and teleported toward him. Haha. Seeing Shimen Jinzhong escape, the celestial didn't chase after him. Instead, he looked at that panic-stricken literary sage and strode towards him. You. Don't come here. That literary sage was extremely scared and actually screamed like a weak girl. The Thunderbolt Immortal saw that Xiao Hua and the celestial both had opponents. He smiled at Dongfang Qianghao and said, "Old Dongfang, are you going to pick I as your opponent?" Ha ha ha. Dongfang Qianghao looked up to the sky and laughed. The Thunder Immortal is very famous. He killed many of our Confucian cultivators in the soaring Dragon Mountain range. This old man shrank back when I saw the lightning. I didn't dare to fight the immortal. Your opponent is Bai Ming Cho Qing. Dongfang Qionghao's eyes flashed with golden light. He looked at Wen Chu and said, "Literary Star Palace Master, can you fight with me?" Fight. Wen Chu's expression did not change, but a complicated emotion flashed in his eyes as he replied. Watching Wen Chu, Dongfang Qianghao, and the others fly away, Thunderbolt Immortal looked at Bai Ming Chui Qing and the other literary sages in the distance. He crooked his neck and laughed. Bai Ming Chui Qing? Such a name seems to be very cultured, but looking at your excellency's appearance, it really has nothing to do with that. A tasteless Confucian cultivator like you. How could you possibly be a match for me? The Bai Ming family used plum blossoms as their symbol, so they naturally emphasized elegance and taste. However, Bai Ming Chui Qing and even Bai Ming Jiqing had put on weight, especially Bai Ming Chui Qing. Although her face was delicate and pretty, if she were to put on an official's attire, she would look more like an ordinary village official. How could she have the demeanor of the patriarch of the four great families whose names shook the world? Previously, Bai Ming Chao Qing had also used a cultivation method to temper her corporeal body, but she originally had this kind of physique. Admittedly, the cultivation method had a certain effect, but how could it be more convenient than transfiguration? However, if she transfigured her body, Bai Ming Chui Qing would be somewhat disdainful. Therefore, Bai Ming Chui Qing had always considered herself a beauty. Of course, no one in the world dared to expose Bai Ming Chui Qing's freckles. Today, Thunderbolt Immortal exposed her. How could Bai Ming Chui Qing not be angry? Bai Ming Chui Qing roared, "Old Thunderbolt Immortal. Don't think that you're invincible just because you killed a few literary sages of the mysterious Yellow Order. Today, I swear I'll kill you on the spot. You see, I just said you have no taste, and now you're throwing away the hypocrisy of a Confucian cultivator." The mischievous Thunderbolt Immortal was not anxious at all. He was all smiles as he said, "We've only just talked about superficial appearances, we haven't touched on the heart yet. Do you want me to boil some chicken soup for you to try, to make up for what you lack?" Without waiting for Thunderbolt Immortal to finish speaking, Bai Ming Chui Qing raised her hand and patted the top of her head. Boom. 5-colored true qi gushed out, running straight through heaven and earth. The 5-colored true qi of the four great clans was naturally modeled, and so was Bai Ming Chui Qing's. However, within this soaring true qi pillar, the modeled true qi was azure, like plum blossoms. Woo! Once the 5-colored true qi pillar appeared, the space within several hundred li shook. Countless true qi pillars fell from the sky, and when the 5-colored true qi pillar enveloped the space within several hundred li like a fountain, those plum blossoms flickered with blue color and drifted down in the air. It was truly dazzling, truly beautiful. Looking at those literary sages of the 9th grade elemental energy, they also each stood in a corner, releasing their heterogeneous 5-colored true qi, trapping the Thunderbolt Immortal from the bottom. Moreover, when the 5-colored true qi gushed out, the figures of those literary sages also disappeared. Good, it's really not bad. The Thunderbolt Immortal was not anxious. He pinched his chin with his hand, with a rather elegant demeanor, and said with a smile, "It looks too beautiful to be absorbed all at once. However, when displayed by a person as fat as a pig like you, no matter how you look at it, there are some flaws. Sigh, what can I do, what can I do?" After saying that, the Thunderbolt Immortal rubbed his hands slightly, blinked his eyes, and said, "Such a beautiful painting, let this old man add the finishing touch." When Bai Ming Chui Qing heard that, she was so angry that her lungs were about to explode. She stood in the air and said coldly, "Since that's the case, then please raise your brush and correct it. I hope you don't talk too big, or your teeth will fall out." Hee hee. In the Thunderbolt Immortal's hand, clusters of lightning slowly emerged. He still had a smile on his face as he replied, "Although this old man doesn't have Daoist sorcerer's brush, and can't use the wondrous blossom brush, it's more than enough to correct your vulgarity. As for my teeth, please don't worry. This old man's age hasn't reached the point where my teeth will fall out, so we can't be mentioned in the same breath." After saying that, the Thunderbolt Immortal waved his hands, and tens of thousands of thunderbolts appeared out of thin air, transforming into the shapes of brushes, and pointed towards the plum blossoms in the air at the same time. This thunderbolt was like a huge wave overturning the sky, overturning the entire space, and its momentum was incomparably vast. However, all the thunderbolts had only rushed out 100 feet when the countless plum blossoms in the air suddenly produced indescribable fluctuations. These fluctuations were like a net, intertwining and falling. Wherever the fluctuations passed, all the thunderbolts immediately ceased to exist, turning into nothingness. So much so that when the fluctuations landed on the Thunderbolt Immortal's body, even the lightning flashing around the Thunderbolt Immortal's body was also smoothed out. The Thunderbolt Immortal was dumbstruck. Looking at those plum blossoms, they were like Bai Ming Chui Qing's small eyes that were mocking him. Ha ha ha. Bai Ming Chui Qing laughed wildly. "It's just the Dao Sex Thunderbolt technique, what's there to be arrogant about? Didn't you want to correct this old man's winter plum forbidden lightning diagram? Why don't you pick up your lightning brush? Without it, I'm afraid your teeth will fall out. Damn it." The Thunderbolt Immortal was ashamed and angry. He raised his hand and slapped the top of his head. Rumble. A cluster of lightning spurted out, transforming into a thunderbolt technique that grabbed towards Bai Ming Chui Qing. Unfortunately, as soon as the lightning appeared, the fluctuations rose again. That thunderbolt technique whimpered as it shrank and disappeared, not causing any waves at all. "Since you don't have the strength to lift the brush, then let this old man do it." Bai Ming Chui Qing was in high spirits. She opened her mouth and a mouthful of life's true energy gushed out, transforming into countless fine threads that were similar to inscription chains. At the same time, they entered the void and connected all the plum blossoms together. Fall. When Bai Ming Chui Qing shouted, a huge azure inscription was spurted out from her mouth, falling in mid-air and exploding with a loud bang. Tens of thousands of plum blossoms spiraled and flashed, gushing over from all directions. That indescribable fluctuation transformed into an invisible lotus shape, trapping the Thunderbolt Immortal. As soon as the lotus shape was formed, the Thunderbolt Immortal could not perceive the situation outside the space. He only felt a cluster of misty green halos covering the area around him. He could not use his divine thoughts, the chi of heaven and earth was isolated, and even the void was imprisoned. Not good. The Thunderbolt Immortal was shocked and hurriedly wanted to urge the sound of thunder. However, just as he was about to urge his magic power, he suddenly frowned again. That's not right. The Thunderbolt Immortal narrowed his eyes and looked at the illusory green light around him. He thought to himself, the Bai Ming family is one of the 4 great families of Confucian cultivators. How can there be the aura of Taoist magic in his green light? Although this aura is very subtle, I was born to report Taoism. How can I not detect it? It's really weird. Just as the Thunderbolt Immortal was puzzled, the fluctuating aura became more and more intense, and a destructive momentum surged in the entire space. Haha. After being surprised, the Thunderbolt Immortal laughed out loud. He raised his hand and made a rare hand seal. He said, "Although this old man is called the Thunderbolt Immortal and the Thunderbolt technique is naturally this old man's strongest technique, don't you think you're being too delusional if you want to imprison this old man with merely the winter plum forbidden lightning diagram?" Immediately, the Thunderbolt Immortal made a gesture and a bean-sized lamp appeared in midair. This lamp was divided into 6 colors, which was exactly the same as Xiao Hua's 6-colored spiritual fire. Old man Biming, you fat toad at the bottom of a well. Today, I'll let you see the power of my Daoist magic. The thunderbolt immortal shouted. Break. Following the thunderbolt immortal's finger, a thick crystal light fell into the lamp. The six-colored spiritual fire instantly turned into a several zhang large fire pillar and directly penetrated the thunderbolt immortal's feet. The spiritual fire was the absolute weapon that Xiaohua used before he reached the nascent soul stage. Once the spiritual fire was used, it was invincible. However, because the spiritual fire consumed too much magic power, Xiaohua would never use it unless he had no other choice. When Xiaohua reached the 9th grade of origin energy, there were too many methods that he could use. Therefore, although the spiritual fire had already become six-colored, Xiaohua basically didn't use it anymore. The Thunderbolt Immortal naturally knew the power of the six-colored spiritual fire. While he was cultivating the Thunderbolt technique, he was also pondering how to refine the six-colored spiritual fire. The incantation that he was using now was a spell that used the six-colored spiritual fire as the seed and his own magic power as the supplement. This spell was purely of the fire attribute and didn't consume much magic power. Normally, the Thunderbolt Immortal didn't have the opportunity to use this spell. Since he was forced to this place by Biming Chuqing, he just happened to witness the power of this fire attribute spell. Chapter 46-21. Puff. A muffled sound that wasn't particularly loud rang out. The place where the fire pillar landed, the misty blue illusion was pierced through. Under the fire pillar, the hundreds of plum blossom clouds vanished. The forbidden thunder diagram of the winter plum blossom had been easily destroyed by the thunder immortal. What? What kind of fire is this? Biming Chuqing looked at the fire pillar in a daze and cried out, "How can an ordinary fire break my green lotus stud?" At this point, Biming Chuqing's expression changed greatly. He hurriedly raised his hand and grabbed. A huge hand of several miles in size fell from the sky. He shouted angrily, "Damn it! You! How can you bully the weak like this?" Seeing that the fire pillar had broken through the imprisonment, the Thunderbolt Immortal's figure swayed and immediately landed at the flaw. He reached his hand into the fire pillar. Then, without hesitation, the Thunderbolt Immortal flipped his hands and several fire spears separated from the fire pillar. Woo! The Thunderbolt Immortal raised his hand again. Several fire spears fell into the void and disappeared in a flash. Ah! Almost at the same time, several plum blossoms disappeared where the fire spears landed. Miserable shrieks rang out in the air as several literary saints appeared in the void. Each of them had a fire spear stabbed into their chest. Although the fire spears were not enough to kill the literary saints on the spot, the six-colored spiritual fire ignited their true chi and bodies. Even the surrounding void was about to be ignited. Haha! The Thunderbolt Immortal laughed. I'll send these eyesores back to their hometown first. Then I'll tell you what elegance is. Huff. At this time, Biming Chuqing's huge hand fell. Where the true chi fell, the six-colored spiritual fire did not extinguish. Instead, it went against the flow and ignited Biming Chuqing's huge hand. Damn it. Biming Chuqing was shocked. She cursed and decisively cut her wrist. With a swoosh, she threw the huge hand away. Just as Biming Chuqing was about to use another magical power, Dongfang Qionghao's voice came from afar. Biming Chuqing glared at the Thunderbolt Immortal fiercely. Her figure turned into a plum blossom shadow and disappeared instantly. TCH. The Thunderbolt Immortal shouted disdainfully. She really has no manners. She escaped without even saying goodbye. Then, the Thunderbolt Immortal did not even look at the literary sages who were burned by the spiritual fire and chased after them. In order to avoid Biming Chuqing's winter plum forbidden lightning diagram, Dongfang Qionghao's figure flickered and lured Wen Chu to another high altitude. At this moment, Chao Muya's heavenly light split in two, and the sky was once again covered in a faint greenish gray. Layers of earth, fire, wind, and lightning roared in the sky, and the clouds that approached Chao Muya were shattered into pieces. Wen Chu landed and looked at Dongfang Qiongghao, who was on guard in the distance. His eyes flashed with worry. He looked around and sighed. We Confucians have written many poems. Other than Immortals at the Magpie Bridge, this old man likes Song of Tomorrow the most. Then, when Chu didn't dare to look at Dongfang Xionghao's confusion, he started to recite, tomorrow comes after tomorrow, how many tomorrows are there? I am waiting for tomorrow, and all things are wasted. If the people of the world are tired by tomorrow, spring will pass and autumn will come, and the old will come. In the morning, he looked at the east flowing water, in the evening, he looked at the west setting sun. How much could tomorrow be in 100 years? Please listen to my song of tomorrow. When he finished reciting, when Chu continued, looking at Chao Muya, this old man suddenly feels that time is passing quickly. Day after day, day after day, day after day, day after day. A day is but a blink of an eye. How much time is there in a person's life? Why do we not do meaningful things and only do boring things? Dongfang Xianxia naturally didn't know that when Chu's feelings had just been born, and he was looking at the world with his own ignorant eyes. However, when he saw that when Chu didn't make a move, he waved his hand, and the literary sages disappeared and landed in various places. The master of Wen Chu Palace is quite refined. Dongfang Xianxia smiled. Although this old man has never seen you before, I know that you are a refined person after seeing you today. You are completely different from that bastard Gauchen. However, to be honest, I, Jian Zhong, and the others might not be any better than Gauchen. Perhaps we were like you in our early years, and we used to make tea with clear spring water and red mud to make wine. However, now that we are in your position, we have already treated our previous lives as our ideal. At this point, Dongfang Xianxia sighed. Actually, sometimes this old man also wants to be like you, to throw away these shackles, or to find a desolate mountain to cultivate in peace, or to find Gauchen to become the master of some palace and live a leisurely life. However, if this old man takes half a step back, others will take a step forward. My Dongfang family's thousands of years of foundation may become someone else's. This old man has taken over this heavy responsibility from my ancestors, and I can't slack off. My fate has already been decided when I took over the position of master. To be honest, this old man doesn't think that the four great families will win today's battle. When Chu retracted his gaze and looked at the disciples who were fighting beneath his feet, he said, "You don't know enlightened Master Zhao's background at all. Don't you think that it's not worth it to make both sides suffer for the 5 Qis unification art? There are some things that must be done. Even if the price is high, this old man will still do it." Dongfang Xianxia replied. However, there are some things that cannot be done. Even if there is no price, this old man will not do them. The 5 Qis unification art is extremely important to our 4 clans. We must obtain it at all costs. Wen Chu sneered. If this old man told you that you didn't need to do so much, you wouldn't need to set up such a trap. This old man already told you when I gave the 5 Qis unification art to Immortal Emperor Gauchen. I'm returning it to the Confucian cultivators, not the immortal palaces. It won't be long before the 5 Qis unification art is made public on hidden immortal continent. Dongfang Xianxia was stunned and did not say anything for a long time. He stared at Wen Chu as if he was thinking about the validity of Wen Chu's words. However, Dongfang Xianxia spoke again, "I believe your words. However, I don't believe the Gauchen. Or rather, I don't believe that the Gauchen would give the 5 Qis unification art to our 4 clans and the 100 schools of philosophers for no reason. Moreover, I can tell you with certainty that if you don't make the 5 Qis unification art public, then your so-called return of the 5 Qis unification art to the Confucian cultivators is nothing more than a joke. You're only using the 5 Qis unification art to give yourself the title of Confucian Immortal Master, the master of the Literature Star Palace." Wen Chu shrugged helplessly. "This is all I can do. You can do even more." Dongfang Xianxia smiled. "You can give the 5 Qis unification art to our 4 clans and work together with us." Dongfang Xianxia hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I can even promise you that if possible, our 4 clans can recommend you to be The immortal emperor of the immortal palaces. Wen Chu knew that Dongfang Xianxia was trying to bewitch him. He shook his head. How can I be the immortal emperor with my temperament? If I wanted to, why would I give the 5 Qis unification art to immortal Emperor Gaochen? Dongfang Xianxia remained silent. Wen Chu pondered for a moment before continuing. When I gave the 5 Qis unification art to immortal Emperor Gaochen, we had an agreement. That's why I can't give the 5 Qis unification art to the 4 clans. However, if the 4 clans agree, I'll discuss it with Daoist Master Xiao and come up with a foolproof plan. Although Wen Chu didn't say that Xiao Hua could give the 5 Qis unification technique to the 4 great families, Dongfang Xianxia knew from Dongfang Yushan that Xiao Hua also knew the 5 Qis unification technique, so he understood. However, Dongfang Xianxia rejected Wen Chu's offer and shook his head. There's no turning back now. Unless Daoist Master Xiao hands over the 5 Qis unification art now. That's why. Wen Chu smiled wryly. Even if you know this is immortal Emperor Gaochen's plan, you still have to step in. Yes. There are many things in this world that are beyond one's control. Dongfang Xianxia nodded. Just like now, I know you're a gentleman and want to befriend you, but I still have to think of a way to capture you. As he spoke, Dongfang Xianxia slapped the top of his head, and a large, crystal-clear, multicolored hand appeared out of thin air and grabbed at him. Wen Chu also unleashed a 5-colored hand. Although the hand was not solid, its color was pure, and as it passed, Dongfang Xianxia's shackles were swept away. Wen Chu sighed. When it comes to Confucian techniques, you are no match for me. Boom. Wen Chu's hand clashed with Dongfang Xianxia's. Under the huge force, Dongfang Xianxia's hand crumbled into pieces of runes while Wen Chu's hand was still there and quickly restored. Dongfang Xianxia wasn't surprised at all. He narrowed his eyes and said, "It's too early to talk about this." Sure enough, at the place where the 5-colored hands landed, a green bamboo shoot appeared. Puff. Dongfang Xianxia's true qi flowed into the bamboo shoot and it suddenly turned into a huge bamboo tree. It was green and glistening. This is. Wen Chu didn't understand. The hand that hadn't recovered reached out again. Woo. Wherever Wen Chu's large hand landed, the bamboo swiftly turned into a grayish-yellow color. Numerous pale yellow bamboo flowers slowly grew on them. Once these bamboo flowers were revealed, inscriptions suddenly appeared in the previously untraceable sky. These inscriptions faded under the pale yellow color of the bamboo flowers, transforming into numerous colorless bamboo flowers. A faint aura of death quickly spread around. Wen Chu raised an eyebrow. He seemed to understand something. Whoosh. Tens of thousands of colorless flowers suddenly bloomed and Wen Chu's hand withered. All of his true qi flowed into the flowers. At the same time, the aura of death surged towards Wen Chu like a tidal wave. Wen Chu activated his true qi and the 5-colored light quickly faded under the aura of death. The inscriptions were wiped out by the aura of death. Give it a tip, and thank you for all your support. Chapter 46-22. Your Excellency, there's no need to struggle. Only by handing over the 5 Qis unifications will you be able to avoid becoming a skeleton. Dongfang Xianxia said with pride, otherwise, only death awaits you. Wen Chu let out a long laugh and pointed at the blooming bamboo flowers and the surging death aura. He said in a clear voice, although the blooming of bamboo represents the withering of bamboo, it is still the birth of bamboo flowers and the birth of new bamboo. We Confucian cultivators focus on life, we cultivate the power of life. You don't understand, you've gone astray. You only see death and ignore life. How can this kind of death trap this old man? As he spoke, Wen Chu opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of refined life energy from his dantian. Whoosh. Like a spring breeze, the entire space was immediately filled with layers of bright green. In this bright green aura, all the death energy seemed to be boiling and bubbling. In just a moment, all the bubbles fell into the light yellow bamboo flowers. The bamboo flowers disappeared, and one by one, thumb-sized bamboo shoots were revealed. Dongfang Xianxia sucked in a cold breath. He knew he had underestimated Wen Chu's Confucian divine abilities. Wen Chu's hand was still alive, and his hand was still alive. His hand touched the bamboo shoots and withered flowers. Dongfang Xianxia knew he had underestimated Wen Chu's divine ability. Sigh. Dongfang Xianxia sighed again. He took out an ancient ruler and said, "Actually, this old man really didn't want to come to this step." As he spoke, Dongfang Xianxia waved the ruler. A stern and heavy aura came from the ruler. Along with this aura, there was the sound of tens of thousands of children chanting. It was as if the entire world had become a huge school. When Chu became a student in this school. The ferrule slowly fell down, and countless inscriptions flew out from the ferrule. They flashed in the air and made a sound. A voice that resounded through the heavens and earth rang out amidst the chanting of the 10,000 children. A teacher teaches and dispels doubts. The moment this voice came out, the chanting stopped abruptly. Yes. This voice was like all living beings bowing their heads. As a Confucian cultivator, Wen Chu felt an irresistible silence in his heart. He was about to bow his head before this respectful teacher. The ruler fell down like a mountain and was about to land on Wen Chu's forehead. Boom. At this critical moment, Wen Chu's head spat out 5-colored qi. The heaven and earth pagoda flew out and blocked the ruler. The almost unparalleled power landed on the heaven and earth pagoda. The heaven and earth pagoda roared and a surge of heaven and earth Dao rushed out. Not only did it block the heaven and earth Dao, but the heaven and earth Dao also counterattacked Dongfang Xianxia's subbody. Dongfang Xianxia's subbody was destroyed. Heaven and earth pagoda? You. How do you have such a wondrous item? Dongfang Xianxia's face was pale as he looked at the heaven and earth pagoda above Wen Chu's head in disbelief. Wen Chu sneered, "Don't you also have the Saint Ruler? Unfortunately, you used the heaven and earth Dao against my Confucian cultivator. I'm afraid you won't be able to ascend in this life." Humph. Dongfang Xianxia snorted and said, "Even if this old man's body is destroyed, I won't let you join the North Star." Roar. Dongfang Xianxia roared and the sound waves spread in all directions. Dongfang Xianxia raised his hand and the sound waves landed between his eyebrows. Shwa. A clear light appeared between Dongfang Xianxia's eyebrows. Words flew out and formed lines of poems in the air. The lines of poems condensed into articles, and the articles condensed into scrolls. When the scrolls opened, a soft voice sounded. Although the voice was soft, it was deafening to Wen Chu's ears. Wen Chu was confused at first, but when the voice recited a few lines, Wen Chu's forehead shone with a clear light. Wen Chu suddenly realized what was going on. However, before Wen Chu could do anything, 4 distorted figures flashed in the sky. Shimen Jinzhong, Nangang Tianji, and Baiming Chuqing arrived at the same time. The 3 of them stood in the air and raised their hands to point at their own forehead. Similar clear light spurted out and shrouded the surrounding hundreds of miles. 4 layers of clear light fell, and another strange phenomenon appeared. In the sky within hundreds of miles, endless auspicious clouds and multicolored light appeared. Within the auspicious clouds and multicolored light, there seemed to be many illusory figures. Behind these illusory figures, there were all kinds of strange phenomena, such as dragons and phoenixes, abundant grains, picturesque territories, and so on. Xiaohua, the thunderbolt immortal, and the celestial being naturally chased after them. However, this clear light was so mysterious that not only did it block the figures of Xiaohua and the others, even their divine senses couldn't penetrate it. Damn it. Xiaohua narrowed his eyes and cursed in a low voice. He raised his hand and patted the top of his head. A 5-colored big hand was about to grab him. Boom. Just at this time, a huge vibration occurred in the sky. Like a huge wave, a fluctuation emerged from the clear light. Xiaohua's 5-colored big hand was instantly shaken into powder. When the light became clear again, the hidden clouds had already disappeared, revealing the situation inside. At this time, inside the clear light, for voices recited the scrolls at the same time. The voices were different, and the accents were different. However, where the voices fell, the scrolls began to gather, vibrate, and transform. The mountain of books and the sea of literature swayed, and 4 similar but actually different Wenchu stars were born from the scrolls. These stars looked somewhat blurry and even somewhat broken, but the Wenchu aura inside the stars was very strong. Disciple respectfully invites the sage. The 4 family heads bowed at the same time. Another pillar of 5-colored true energy mixed with essence blood fell into the Wenchu star. Ka 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 ka. For clear shattering sounds came from the sky. As the 4 Wenchu stars shattered, 4 sages with only half of their bodies were revealed. The moment this saint appeared, tens of thousands of auspicious clouds covered the sky, and thousands of rays of light shone. The sound of the 100 heavy suns rang out, and 10 thunderbolts descended. In this saint's hand, there was another beautiful ink brush. Seeing this, Xiaohua, who was about to use his divine ability again, smiled. He crossed his arms and coldly stood there, quietly watching. When the 4 sages appeared, Dongfang Qianghao looked at Shimen Jianzhong. The 2 of them exchanged glances and their bodies moved. As the 2 of them moved, the 2 sages above their heads merged and formed a complete sage. Xiaohua, who was originally hugging the scrolls to watch the show, suddenly trembled and cried out, Lao Tzu. Because in the ancient books of Confucianism, it was very clear that Lao Tzu had taught Confucius and could be said to be Confucius' teacher. However, Lao Tzu's disciples and inheritance were not found in the 100 schools of thought. Even when Wenchu became a Wenchu star, Lao Tzu's figure was not found in the sages Wenchu. Lao Tzu could be said to be a sage who had disappeared. No one knew where Lao Tzu had gone. However, at this moment, Xiaohua actually saw Lao Tzu's sage statue in this place. Xiaohua really did not expect that the so-called 4 great families were actually Lao Tzu's descendants and inheritance. Xiaohua was surprised. The 2 sages above Nangong Tianji and Baiming Chuqing's heads were also working together. As Xiaohua expected, it was another Lao Tzu's sage statue. These 2 Lao Tzu's sage statues looked exactly the same, but their auras were different. Even the holy sounds coming from their mouths and the holy brushes in their hands were different. Alas! Seeing the 2 Lao Tzu's sage statues, Wenchu sighed and said, Sins committed by the heavens can be forgiven, but sins committed by oneself are the hardest to bear. Then, Wenchu pointed at the spot between his eyebrows. Swoosh! The same strange phenomenon appeared, but the Wenchu star that rushed out of Wenchu's eyebrows was unusually clear, and even the fine lines on it were clear. Wenchu bowed and said, Disciple invites the sages to show themselves. Then, without Wenchu activating his blood essence, the sages who had experienced the sages Wenchu's sage statues in the ruins appeared again. These sages' sage statues were different. Some of them were human cultivators standing proudly with tall hats and broad belts, and some of them were human warriors standing alone in the wind with golden helmets and silver armors. In their hands, some of them were writing down historical records that had never been recorded, and some of them were writing down memories that had never been recorded in their weapons. No way, right? Dongfang Qianghao, Shimen Jianzhong, Nangong Tian, and Baiming Chuqing looked at each other in dismay. Their eyes were wide open, and they cried out in shock. Their mouths were opened so wide that several goose eggs could be stuffed in. At this moment, the 2 Lao Tzu's sage statues moved. 2 ink brushes pointed at the sages, and they shouted in the air, The Tao that can be said, is not the Tao. Under the ink brushes, the sages shouted in unison, The name that can be named, is not the name of the Hanggu Pass. As the sages chanted, the sages' brushes also pointed out. Where the inexplicable waves and light and shadow collided, the 2 Lao Tzu's sage statues turned into fragments. The clear light that enveloped 1,000 miles of space wrapped these fragments and returned to the spots between the eyebrows of the 4 clan masters. When the clear light revealed their figures, the 4 clan masters staggered and almost fell from the sky. They looked at Wenchu in extreme horror, and their lips trembled. They didn't know what to say. This was because they knew very well that with the prosperity of the human race, education was hard to come by. On the hidden immortal continent, there were many sage scholars, but very few sage scholars. This was because it was too difficult for the sages to choose Wenchu. Even the powerful immortal palace and the 4 clan masters could only activate one sage, or even half a sage, to point out the outline of Wenchu. Although they could step into the realm of sage scholars, the so-called sage scholars were no longer true sage scholars. They could only be called half-sage scholars, or quasi-sage scholars. Chapter 46-23. The clan masters of the 4 clans were not lacking in their calculations. They activated the holy statues and prepared to use 2 of the holy statues to kill Wenchu's holy statue. From what they knew, Wenchu was most likely a half-saint literary star like them. At best, he could be a complete literary star. They had 2 holy statues, so they had an absolute advantage. So much so that they even indulged in the wildest fantasy that even if Wen and Chu were double Saint Wen stars, their lousy holy statues were absolutely stronger than Wen and Chu's Saint Wen star. However, they never thought that Wen Chu was actually a double saint literary star. He could even be called a 10,000 saint literary star. How could their holy statues be a match for him? They had lifted a rock and smashed it on their own feet. Give me your life. Seeing this, the Celestial laughed and waved his bone spear, about to rush over. Rumble. At this moment, something strange happened again. Dark clouds appeared where the earth, fire, wind, and thunder had been. Wave after wave of darkness covered the entire sky. Within the darkness, thousands of specks of starlight came crashing down with the power of the stars and moon. Within a few thousand miles, the space was sealed. Essence energy below the 8th level was like a heavy burden. Not to mention flying, even standing in the air was difficult. Immortal Palace Star River. Immortal Palace Star River. Dongfang Qionghao's face was ferocious. He pointed at the sky and shouted crazily, "Master Shaolei, Master of Literature Palace, take a good look. This is Gao Chen's scheme, and also his dark methods. He will only hide behind the scenes and wait for us to fight to the death. Then, he will come and reap the benefits." After that, Dongfang Qianghao and the other 3 took out their garrison orders, garrison flags, troop gathering drums, and troop collecting gongs. It seemed like they were going to collect the disciples of the 4 great families in the abyss. Damn it! Xiaohua scanned with his divine sense and immediately knew that the Immortal Palace Star River not only had the Star River sand refined by the great craftsmen of the Immortal Palace Star River, but there was also the Khanate heavy water. Although this momentum was not as strong as the heavenly demon's destruction of the world in the ruins, the momentum was much stronger. Xiaohua didn't dare to delay. He raised his hand and handed the Kunlun mirror to the Celestial. He said, "Please." "All right." The Celestial looked at the river of stars that filled the sky and poured down. With a loud roar, he took the Kunlun mirror and was about to fly down. Woo woo. In this world, below everyone, 4 figures appeared. Dongfang Qianghao, Shimen Jinzhong, Nangong Tianji, and Baiming Chuqing's figures distorted and crashed into the void. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared. Damn it. The patriarchs of the 4 great clans actually fled at the last minute and abandoned their disciples? The Celestials stared blankly at the abyss. Most of the hundreds of thousands of disciples from the 4 great clans were injured, and none of them had been taken into the hidden weapon flag or any other imperial equipment. The Celestial didn't know what to do and shouted, "Fellow Daoist, what should we do now?" At this moment, the heavenly heavy water had already covered the sky and covered the earth. The stellar river sand carried the power of the stars as it poured down in a destructive manner. The void shattered, lightning flashed, and thunder rumbled. Xiaomuya was once again in a state of apocalypse. "Withdraw." Xiaohua shouted without any hesitation, first accept Fortune Gate disciples, then the 4 families' disciples. Yes. Hearing this, the Celestial controlled the Kunlun mirror and rushed into the abyss. Xiaohua soared into the sky and shouted again, "Fellow Daoist Wenchu, quickly summon the mountain river seal or the heaven and earth pagoda and help the celestial to accept disciples. I will absorb the heavenly heavy water. Unfortunately, when Chu turned a deaf ear to Xiao Hua's words and only stared at the heavenly palace galaxy with a complicated expression. Damn it! Xiao Hua cursed inwardly, why do things always go wrong at the crucial moment? Fellow Daoist Celestial. Xiao Hua hurriedly shouted, quickly release fellow Daoist Feng Wu. All right. The Celestial naturally knew that Xiao Hua was trying to hide something, so he responded and casually activated the Kunlun mirror. Boom. Within the pillar of light, the phoenix parasol spread its wings and flew out. The power of the stars and moon surged out and swept towards the galaxy. At the same time, the star runes around the phoenix parasol's body appeared again. The void was torn apart and countless pillars of light descended. A huge phantom of a phoenix that was 1,000 miles long condensed on the phoenix parasol's body. As it spread its wings, the power of the stars and moon that was even more powerful than the falling galaxy rushed into the sky again. Starry sky, great sage. All of a sudden, a clear and melodious voice rang out in the midst of the starry night. A woman dressed in palace attire flashed past the pitch-black darkness. Fellow Daoist lightning. Xiao Hua's eyes narrowed. He swept his gaze across the galaxy and ordered, go and see who is causing trouble here. Don't worry. The lightning sage turned into lightning and rushed into the sky, shouting, I love to destroy flowers. At this time, the innate heavy water had already fallen. Feng Wu used the power of the stars and moon to block the stellar river sand, but she couldn't stop the heavy water. Xiao Hua released his consciousness and covered 1,000 miles, absorbing the heavy water into the Xinhua continent. The Immortal Palace's galaxy seemed to be boundless, and the stellar river sand seemed to be innumerable. Xiao Hua and Feng Wu didn't dare to be careless and tried their best to collect the heavy water. The Celestial was below them, controlling the Kunlun mirror to collect the Fortune Gate's disciples who had already formed a team. The hundreds of thousands of disciples couldn't fly freely under the Immortal Palace's galaxy. Seeing the falling galaxy, they had no way to survive. Therefore, when they heard that Xiao Hua was willing to save them, they hurriedly formed a team and waited for the Celestial to collect them. Z-la-la. Rumble. Strange noises continued to ring out in the sky above Dawn and Dusk Cliff. Space was instantly corroded by the river of stars, and then shattered by the river sand. Fortunately, the heavy water was collected by Xiao Hua, and the river sand was blocked by Feng Wu. The ground wasn't destroyed anymore. Everyone was busy, and only Wen Chu was still standing quietly in the air. Her gaze was fixed on the pitch-black darkness, as if there were endless stories hidden in the darkness. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning flashed in the pitch-black darkness, and then a clear voice shouted, How dare you? How dare you challenge the 5th princess's honor guard? What 5th princess and 6th princess? The lightning Daoist's arrogant voice sounded, I only have eyes for the 9th princess. You're courting death. That voice was like a silver bell, and it was none other than the voice of the Jasper Flower Palace's immortal envoy, Gu Xianyan. Then, there was the sound of an overwhelming chi pillar rumbling, and then a series of miserable screams rang out. A rain of blood mixed with corpses fell from the pitch-black darkness. Hearing that it was the 5th princess, Qingqing, in the pitch-black darkness, Xiao Hua sneered and said in his heart, Injure the 5th princess and avenge Xian. Rumble. Just as Xiao Hua finished speaking, he saw the lightning above the Immortal Palace's galaxy, and miserable screams rang out again. Needless to say, it was the lightning Daoist's annihilation. How dare you injure an immortal emperor's descendant? Immortal Xiao, you violated the immortal law. At this moment, another voice came from the Immortal Palace's galaxy. Then, a general wearing an emperor's armor and a crown flashed over with a distorted figure. The general had just stood beside Xiao Hua when countless chi pillars turned into chains of inscriptions and rushed out. They danced wildly around the general and swept toward Xiao Hua. The master of the Supreme Purity Palace? Xiao Hua's gaze fell on the general's crowned face and saw the sun, moon, and stars above the emperor's armor. How could he not know that this was one of the masters of the Three Purity Palace, the master of the Supreme Purity Palace that he had never seen before? Unfortunately, the master of the Supreme Purity Palace did not give Xiaohua a chance to speak, nor did he allow Xiaohua to resist. He stood still, raised his hand, and pulled out a sword from his waist. With a wave of his hand, the sword revealed a huge shadow and slashed toward Xiaohua. Hiss! Xiaohua was shocked. Looking at the huge shadow, he sucked in a breath of cold air. The Xianyuan sword? Of course, the sword in the master of the Supreme Purity Palace was bronze in color. One side of the sword was divided into 5 sections, respectively engraved with the sun, moon, and stars. The other side was divided into 9 sections, respectively engraved with mountains, rivers, and plants. On the sword hilt, one side of the sword was engraved with farming and animal husbandry techniques, while the other side was engraved with the strategy to unify the 4 seas. As the shadow flashed, the sun, moon, and stars lingered, the mountains, rivers, and plants danced, and an unparalleled sharpness cut through the void, setting off a wave of wind whistling. Xiaohua was surprised, but he sighed again. He looked at the Fortune Gate's disciples and the 4 great families' disciples with some hesitation. At this time, he was concentrating on collecting the Khanate heavy water, so he couldn't divert his attention to fight the enemy. He couldn't even ask Daoist which to come out of the space. Because as soon as he withdrew his attention, the Khanate heavy water, which could destroy everything in the abyss below the dawn and dusk cliff, would definitely fall. At that time, not to mention the 4 great families' disciples, many of the Fortune Gate's disciples would die. Moreover, if the Khanate heavy water fell into the abyss, Xiaohua couldn't guarantee that the heaven punishment prison crystal that imprisoned Xian would be intact. Xian could also be injured. Fight! Xiaohua gritted his teeth, not daring to withdraw his attention. He anxiously shouted in his heart, "Celestial, quickly call Daoist witch out." "So, it's you." At this time, Wen Chu, who had been standing still, suddenly spoke. He stared straight at the master of the Supreme Purity Palace and said word by word, "If you were so resolute and daring tens of thousands of years ago, how would you have let her die?" While speaking, Wen Chu suddenly opened his mouth. Woo-woo. 9 sword intents flew out. The moment the sword intents touched the ground, they turned into 9 flying swords. They whimpered as they flew towards the Xianyuan sword's shadow in the shape of 9 stars. Wherever the sword light passed, cold light flashed like falling tears. The sound of swords rang out, and the whimpering sound was like mournful sobs. What was extremely strange was that when the 9 stars reached the Xianyuan sword's shadow, they turned into a flexible sword. As this flexible sword danced, it gave birth to a peerless sword splendor. The figure of a fairy flickered within the sword splendor, and a kind of sword intent that was as rich as the grace of a beauty and as chaotic as the sorrow of a beauty turned into flowing water and crashed into the shadow without hesitation. Chapter 46-24. Pear Blossom. Pear Blossom. Pear Blossom. All of a sudden, the master of Xianxia Palace shouted. His body, which was brimming with true qi, trembled violently. The shadow of the Xianyuan sword, which was chopping down with all his strength, unexpectedly stopped in midair. The shadow of the Xianyuan sword only stopped for a moment, but the sun, moon, stars, mountains, rivers, and vegetation all turned into fragments. The Xianyuan sword in the master of Xianxia Palace's hand flashed with a bronze sword light. This sword light was the result of him forcibly withdrawing his true qi. The sword light was like water, falling back into the body of the master of Xianxia Palace. Boom! A loud sound burst from the surface of the master of Xianxia Palace's body. The crown of the master of Xianxia Palace's crown flew away, revealing the true appearance of the master of Xianxia Palace. Li Xiaobai? Xiaohua looked at the appearance of the master of Xianxia Palace and was stunned on the spot. Wasn't this the appearance of Li Xiaobai's corpse that Xiaohua saw in the sword cave in the Mo Zhao Black Forest? Damn it, this. What the hell is going on? Xiaohua groaned, his mind confused. The master of Xianxia Palace didn't pay attention to anything else, only staring at the peerless sword brilliance. Although he had put away the sword in time, how powerful was the Xianyuan sword? How powerful was the 9 stars transit? When the two collided, it was only a moment, but the figure of the beautiful fairy, the unending and chaotic emotions, had already dimmed. Pear blossom. The master of Xianxia Palace muttered weakly, as if he couldn't even pick up the Xianyuan sword. You. She has already fallen. Wen Chu said faintly from the side, in these 9 sword pills, only some of her grief was left. Now that she has come here again, that grief has also dissipated. Everything began here, and it would also end here. Day and night, it's all yearning cliff. Looking at the fairy's figure turning into smoke, the master of Xianxia Palace suddenly reached out, as if he wanted to grab something. However, where his fingers landed, the smoke was disturbed. Not only did the fairy's figure disappear, but the smoke also turned into nothingness. Tears fell from the eyes of the master of Xianxia Palace. He asked softly, She. When she was in the 9 stars sword pill, did she complain? The master of the Xianxia Palace looked like he was asking Wen Chu, but his gaze pierced through the void. It was as though he was looking at himself from tens of thousands of years ago. He had knelt powerlessly beside the Immortal Palace's galaxy and watched as the Pear Blossom Fairy was killed by the Immortal Palace's galaxy. The gentle, water-like sword that had split the Immortal Palace's galaxy into 2 was shattered by the Star River sand and turned into a sword pill that fell into the void crack that suddenly appeared. Wen Chu didn't answer the palace master. He only closed his eyes as tears dripped down. After half a cup of tea's time, Wen Chu opened his eyes again. At this time, Wen Chu was neither happy nor sad. The tears at the corner of his eyes slowly disappeared as he said, I don't know if she is complaining or not. I only know that there's a poem inside the 9 stars sword pill. CI. The eyes of the master of Xianxia Palace lit up. He asked with some fear and some expectation, what CI? The delicate clouds are skillful, the flying stars transmit hatred, and the silver river travels in secret. When the golden wind and the jade do meet, it triumphs over countless mortals. Gentle as water, the auspicious day is like a dream, enduring the Magpie Bridge and returning home. If 2 people's feelings last for a long time, why should they be together day and night? I understand. The master of Xianxia Palace suddenly laughed wildly. Pear Blossom, oh Pear Blossom. You finally understand my difficulties. You have finally forgiven me. Day and night, night and night. Our hearts are in the same place. Which part of us isn't day and night? Boom. As the voice of the master of Xianxia Palace fell, a huge roar sounded again. Countless pillars of qi appeared out of thin air and turned into a huge hole that rushed into the top of the master of Xianxia Palace's head. At the same time, an extremely strange law descended from the sky and very vaguely entered Wen Chu's body. In Wen Chu's eyes, happiness, anger, sorrow, joy, and sorrow were like dazzling colors that appeared and disappeared 9 times in an instant. Then, Wen Chu slightly closed his eyes. When he opened them again, it was with a kind of sympathy. This change was very subtle. Only the muddle-headed Xiao Hua suddenly felt as if he was missing something. He hurriedly looked at Wen Chu, and the corner of Xiao Hua's mouth formed a trace of a smile. Congratulations, Master of Xianxia Palace. After several breaths, the pillar of qi emitted a bright light. A scholarly cultivator wearing an emperor's golden armor descended from the sky. Wasn't this the master of Tai Ching Palace? After the master of Tai Ching Palace landed, he raised his hand and took the crown of the master of Xianxia Palace. He smiled and handed it to the master of Xianxia Palace. Congratulations, Master of Xianxia Palace. The knot in your heart is gone, and the day of your ascension is just around the corner. Congratulations to you, congratulations to you. The master of Xianxia Palace took the crown but didn't put it on. Instead, he looked at the master of Literature Palace and said, I still have to thank you for this matter. Not bad. The master of Tai Ching Palace nodded and patted his head. The brilliance of the crown also disappeared, revealing his true appearance. Immortal bright sword? Although Xiaohua had already expected this, when he saw that the master of Tai Ching Palace really was Immortal Bright Sword, Xiaohua couldn't help but groan. Li Xiubai and Immortal Bright Sword could be regarded as Xiaohua's master. Xiaohua not only obtained the inheritance of sword cultivation from Li Xiubai and Immortal Bright Sword in Mo Zhao Black Forest, but also obtained the Sword Heart Energy Seed Technique and the Primordial Spirit Strengthening Technique. At the same time, it was also because of the Sword Heart Energy Seed Art and the Primordial Spirit Strengthening Art that Xiaohua had the original intention of dividing his primordial spirit. Later on, Xiaohua obtained the Ghost Cultivator's Inextricable Threads Art by chance. Only then did he truly try to divide his primordial spirit and create a complete primordial spirit. Later on, Xiaohua had a great fortune and obtained the Demon Race's External Incarnation Art. He even obtained the Heavenly Devil Essence from the Upper Realm's ruins and cultivated into a true primordial spirit, allowing each primordial spirit to become a real person. But in the end, Li Xiubai and Immortal Bright Sword's Sword Heart Energy Seed Technique and Primordial Spirit Strengthening Technique were the most fundamental origins of the Fortune Gate's 10 Masters. Looking at the familiar faces of the masters of Tai Ching Palace and Xianxia Palace, Xiaohua's doubts in the past finally settled. In the past, when Xiaohua obtained these two seemingly heaven-defying techniques, he was really puzzled. After all, these techniques couldn't be comprehended unless one was an almighty expert. Li Xiubai and Immortal Bright Sword were merely nascent soul cultivators, so how could they have created such powerful techniques? What was special was that on the Dawn Rain continent, there were no other sects that cultivated these mysterious techniques. Even Immortal Bright Sword's Changbai sect and Li Xiubai's Flame Bamboo Sword sect didn't know about them. Only Xiaohua obtained their inheritance. This was obviously illogical. At that time, Xiaohua thought that the cultivators who cultivated these two secret techniques had died due to qi deviation. Only now did he understand that Li Xiubai and Immortal Bright Sword weren't cultivators of the Dawn Rain continent. Their techniques might not have been passed down to their two sections. Only the Immortal Palace's Dual Purity Palace Master could have created such a miraculous primordial spirit-splitting technique, right? Of course, thinking of this, Xiaohua had another realization. The Sword Heart Energy Seed Technique and the Primordial Spirit Strengthening Technique might not have been created by Li Xiubai and Immortal Bright Sword. Perhaps they were techniques that originally existed on the hidden Immortal Continent, or even the three continents. Xiaohua's mind was full of thoughts. In just a moment, he immediately woke up and hurriedly told his experience to Wen Chu through his mind. At this time, the Tai Ching Palace Master looked at Wen Chu with a smile and said meaningfully, "Previously, this old man was very surprised. Whether it was from the Immortal Palace's records or our inference, we couldn't find your origin. If you said that you came from the outside world, your techniques are exactly the same as our Confucian cultivators. Only now did this old man know that you came from that place." Wen Chu nodded and bowed to the Tai Ching Palace Master and the Tai Ching Palace Master. This disciple was lucky enough to obtain the legacy of the two seniors in the Mo Zhao Black Forest. All these years, I have always been grateful for the two seniors' gifts. Today, seeing you, please accept this disciple's master's salute. At this time, Wen Chu's strength had already surpassed the Tai Ching Palace Master and the Tai Ching Palace Master. The Tai Ching Palace Master's previous words were just to get closer to them. They didn't expect Wen Chu to actually salute them as master and disciple. This was a salute from the Wen Chu Palace Master. It was also a salute from a Confucian cultivator. The two were already frightened and wanted to quickly raise their hands to support Wen Chu. Unfortunately, under Wen Chu's insistence, how could the Tai Ching Palace Master resist? The two were surprised but also somewhat helpless and happy. They were surprised because Wen Chu's strength was really powerful. They immediately felt that Wen Chu's true qi was like an ocean, surging and endless. The two were helpless because with this salute, Wen Chu's previous master and disciple relationship had actually ended. Wen Chu didn't have any special karma with them anymore. The two were happy because although Wen Chu's master and disciple relationship had ended, Wen Chu's salute itself showed that he respected his master. This kind of affection couldn't be replaced by simple calculations. The ancients said that if three people walk together, there will always be a teacher. The Tai Ching Palace Master smiled and said, "The Wenchu Palace Master is too rigid. Before, we might have been your master. Now, the one who has achieved is the master. You are the master of us Confucian cultivators. We also want to salute you." With that, the two also pretended to salute. Wen Chu smiled and said, "You salute me, I salute you. When will it end?" Tai Ching Palace Master, there are two other immortal friends who are resisting the Celestial Palace's Milky Way. The Tai Ching Palace Master didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the Tai Ching Palace Master and asked with a smile, "What do you think?" I have a knot in my heart. Setting up this Milky Way formation can be considered as fulfilling my promise to the Celestial Palace. As for whether the Milky Way formation can kill people, it's not something I can control." The Tai Ching Palace Master laughed and said, "Of course, I can't accept the Milky Way formation. I'm afraid I'll have to trouble the Wenchu Palace Master to do it personally." Chapter 46-25. Good. Please wait here for a moment. Wen Chu nodded and replied. His figure turned into a shadow and rushed into the sky. At this time, the pitch-black area was filled with torrential innate heavy water and refined stars like river sand. Xiaohua stood steadily in midair. The entire galaxy seemed to be returning to its origin as it fell into his hands. And in Xiaohua's hand, he had taken out a jade bottle at an unknown time as a cover. He looked very relaxed. Feng Wu was in another place. Her several thousand zhang-long demonic body moved, roaring with the power of countless stars and moons to block the falling stars. Those blocked stars were also mercilessly absorbed by Xiaohua into the space. Without the master of the Supreme Pure Palace, the galaxy formation couldn't stop Wen Chu. Wen Chu nodded at Xiaohua and Feng Wu. He rushed through the galaxy formation and saw above the torrential galaxy was the location of the earth, fire, wind, and lightning. Tens of thousands of immortal soldiers and immortal generals formed a great formation and hid within the earth, fire, wind, and lightning. In this immortal formation, there was a very eye-catching canopy. At this time, the Thunder Immortal condensed a lightning spear. Like a tiger in a flock of sheep, he was invincible and had already arrived under the canopy. In front of the canopy, there were dozens of literary saints desperately trying to resist. Each of them used their Confucian cultivation techniques. Awe-inspiring chi surged and 5-colored clouds gushed out, wanting to protect the canopy. However, how could these literary saints resist the lightning spear of the Thunder Immortal? Under the lightning spear, the awe-inspiring chi was destroyed and the 5-colored clouds were torn apart. The literary saints who were like immortals in the eyes of ordinary people were also killed by the lightning spear of the Thunder Immortal. Seeing several literary saints and hundreds of immortal soldiers and immortal generals being killed, the dozens of literary saints were already afraid and didn't dare to move forward. The Thunderbolt Immortal swayed his thunder spear again, and several phantoms appeared, about to point at the 4 literary sages. The 4 literary sages' faces turned ashen, and they tried their best to urge their imperial equipment to resist. A delicate voice came from the imperial canopy, "Stop." As the voice faded away, the 5-colored light above the canopy slowly converged. The inscription chains that looked like dragons slithering around the light turned into armor and fell into the canopy. A woman in a palace dress appeared from the light. Her skin was snow white, her eyebrows were thin like willows, and her eyes were slightly narrowed. Wasn't this the immortal emperor's 5th princess, Qing Qing? The Thunderbolt Immortal rolled his eyes and said coldly, "Do you think I'll stop just because you tell me to? Do you think you are Princess Xian? As he spoke, the lightning spear of the Daoist Thunderbolt continued onward, piercing through the defensive true energy of the 4 sword saints. At the same time, the lightning spear pierced deeply into their fleshly bodies. 2 of them were hit in the shoulder, and the other 2 landed on the waist. As the 4 of them screamed, their bodies fell into the galaxy. After the 4 literary sages, there were 2 beautiful female officials. One was Gu Xianyun and the other was Yu Xiajing. Yu Xiajing's face was pale as if she had never seen such a situation before. Although Gu Xianyun panicked, there was still a trace of luck on her face. Seeing the Thunderbolt Immortal approaching, Gu Gu Xianyan glanced at Princess Qing and hurriedly flew in front of her, scolding, "Thunderbolt immortal, didn't you hear? Our fifth princess has asked you to stop. If you take half a step more." Gu Xianyan was also confused. In order to show her courage in front of Princess Qing, she actually blocked the Thunderbolt immortal's path. How could the Thunderbolt immortal show mercy to a woman? Without waiting for Gu Xianyan to finish speaking, he raised his hand and waved it. Boom! A thunderbolt appeared near Gu Xianyan and killed her in an instant. Gu Xianyan didn't even have the time to scream before she died immediately. It was a pity that Gu Xianyan used a Daoist nascent soul as a medicinal ingredient and casually killed her. Now, in the Karma reincarnation, she met the Thunderbolt immortal who was born to report the Tao. At this moment, the Thunderbolt immortal didn't have much human emotion. Facing Gu Xianyan, he killed her casually and ended a karma. Damn it! All of you, back off. Princess Qing's eyes were filled with anger, and her sharp chin made her look even more beautiful. Red Lips opened her mouth and said, "Thunderbolt immortal, you're a Daoist cultivator. Now that you've cultivated to the highest realm, you should know that the Confucian cultivators on the hidden immortal continent are the supreme beings, and our immortal palace is even more outstanding. All the more reason you should know your destiny and cooperate with our immortal palace to walk the last part of your path well. Today, you can kill all the immortal generals and literary sages of our immortal palace, but what can you get? In the future, you will face the endless pursuit of the immortal palace. Your cultivation will be interfered with. Even if you take the last step and prepare to ascend, the immortal palace will never let you ascend smoothly. Think about the primordial chaos ancestor. He was much more arrogant than all of you back then, but what happened to him now?" The Thunderbolt immortal ignored Princess Qing's words and raised his hands. Kacha! 2 huge thunderbolts appeared and struck the canopy. Boom! The canopy couldn't withstand the heavy blow and collapsed. The layers of runes whimpered and dissipated in the lightning. This princess is a descendant of the immortal emperor. You violated the immortal law by daring to offend your superior. Princess Qing was a bit scared, but she still held on. However, her tone was already very weak. Princess Qing naturally had her own plans. She only spoke without circulating any true qi, nor did she use any imperial artifacts to defend herself. She believed that as a grand ascension stage cultivator of the Dao sect, the Thunderclap Daoist was also a man, so he most likely wouldn't bully a weak and beautiful woman like her. The Thunderclap Daoist had most likely forced his way in to coerce her. Unfortunately, Princess Qing didn't know that Thunderbolt Immortal wasn't much of a person, let alone a man. Thunderbolt Immortal rushed forward and saw the canopy dissipating, revealing Princess Qing's figure. Thunderbolt Immortal's arm immediately turned into lightning as he punched at Princess Qing. Boom! Princess Qing's heart tightened and her beautiful face paled when she saw the runes on the armor crumble under the fist light. Before the fist hit Princess Qing's body, the Thunderbolt Immortal suddenly remembered that Xiao Hua only wanted him to injure Princess Qing, not kill her. Therefore, he spread out his hand and solidly slapped Princess Qing's proud protrusion. Princess Qing's expression greatly changed. Pfff. She spat out a mouthful of blood and her pale face was filled with extreme shame and anger. You. Princess Qing didn't know what she wanted to say. The place that no man had ever touched was snatched away by a 9th-level elemental energy expert. A feeling that she had never felt before was easily born in this sharp and domineering woman's heart. However, Princess Qing didn't have time to deal with this strange feeling. She hurriedly circulated her true qi to heal her injuries while preparing to escape. Fortunately, the Thunderbolt Immortal didn't attack again. Instead, he hovered in the air and stared at Princess Qing with sharp eyes, the galaxy formation's disk. The Thunderbolt Immortal was famous for his thunderbolt. His gaze was truly powerful, piercing into Princess Qing's heart. In her life, when had anyone given Princess Qing such a shock? Who dared to look Princess Qing in the eyes so brazenly? Who dared to speak to Princess Qing in such an unrestrained manner? Princess Qing couldn't help but raise her hand to her chest. Of course, she only raised her hand and immediately put it down. She shrieked, "You killed me with one palm." Unfortunately, before she could finish, the Thunderbolt Immortal reached his hand into her chest and took out an oval-shaped pendant. See. Princess Qing sucked in a breath of cold air. She felt as if lightning had struck her and her entire body was paralyzed. However, what Princess Qing couldn't accept was that after the Thunderbolt Immortal took the pendant, he turned around and his gaze didn't linger on her body at all. He turned into a bolt of lightning and flew away. See. The literary saints around the canopy all sucked in a breath of cold air that was even greater than Princess Qing's. Moreover, this cold air was enough to freeze them to death. Who in the Immortal Palace didn't know Princess Qing's methods? How could they survive after seeing Princess Qing being humiliated? However, what happened next made them go wild with joy. Princess Qing sat on the clouds and watched the Thunderbolt Immortal's figure turn into lightning. She was silent for a long time. After a while, she gritted her teeth and stood up, shouting, "Let's go. Today's matter. Whoever dares to say a word will be killed without mercy." The dozens of literary saints were relieved of a heavy burden. How could they dare to stay here for a moment longer? They either urged their bodies to give orders or stayed far away and let the female officials come over to serve them. The Thunderbolt Immortal handed the pendant to Wen Chu. Wen Chu breathed out a mouthful of Jinqi on the pendant, and the Astral River Grand Array appeared. As the master of the School of Literature, Wen Chu could easily break the Astral River Grand Array. By the time the array Eye of the Earth, Fire, Wind, and Lightning Grand Array was closed, the heavenly heavy water and astral river sand had disappeared. Wen Chu put away the formation disc and it turned back into a pendant. Wen Chu casually tossed it to the Thunderbolt Immortal. He looked at it and sniffed it before putting it in front of his eyes again. However, when the Thunderbolt Immortal raised his head and looked at the spatial rift where the earth, fire, wind, and lightning resided, he saw Princess Qing's bashful gaze and hateful expression as she gnashed her teeth in hatred. "Hee, you still want what's in Eye's hands back?" The Thunderbolt Immortal waved his hand proudly and actually drew a thunderbolt heart shape in the air. He laughed inwardly. "Even if it's your heart, I won't give it back to you. Give it a tip, and thank you for all your support." Chapter 46-26. Damn it. Seeing the Thunderbolt Immortal's blatant flirting, Princess Qingxing was really angry and anxious. She stomped her feet and wanted to throw a tantrum, but the sage of literature and the female officials had long disappeared from her side. No one dared to approach her when she was about to retreat. With the Milky Way Grand Formation broken, the 1,000-li space imprisonment force disappeared. The remaining several 100,000 disciples of the four families could move again. However, they still stood in the air, maintaining their formation as they looked at the celestial being. Seeing the restriction disappear, the celestial being asked, "Fellow Daoist Xiao, how should we deal with these disciples? Should we kill them all? Or should we just let them surrender?" Xiao Hua pondered for a moment, then smiled and asked Wen Chu, who was descending from the sky, "The Milky Way Grand Formation was broken by fellow Daoist, so let's leave this matter to fellow Daoist." Looking at Xiao Hua's smile, Wen Chu pondered for a moment, then said with a flick of his sleeve, "These disciples are Confucian cultivators, born from the same roots as this old man, and they are also this old man's disciples. Naturally, this old man cannot kill them. If they were captured, they might not be sincere about surrendering. Especially since Immortal Emperor Go-Chen has set up an ambush here, wanting us to perish together with the four families. Why should we let him succeed? If we let these disciples go, the four families' strength will be preserved, and it can also be considered as a restraint to the Immortal Palace, preventing them from burning the bridge after crossing the river." "Deal." Xiao Hua smiled. "I fully agree with fellow Daoist's decision. If we kill these disciples, who will know that we have defeated the four families' joint forces at the Dawn and Skycliff? If the news of us killing several 100,000 people leaks out, the Confucian cultivators may be shocked temporarily, but as time passes, they will definitely see us as butchers. Since that is the case, let them go. Naturally, the celestial being would not listen to Wen Chu. Hearing Xiao Hua's nod, he waved his hand and said, "Let's go." Many thanks to Immortal Master, many thanks to Master Xiao Lei. The heavy stone in the hearts of the several 100,000 disciples of the four families finally fell to the ground. They bowed respectfully, then flew away from the dawn and sky cliff in an orderly manner under the lead of the leading disciples. In this battle, the four families' 900,000 disciples were killed by the Fortune Gate's disciples, and Xiao Hua's Aurora magnetism array had injured 350,000 disciples. The Fortune Gate's disciples took the opportunity to kill another 110,000 disciples, leaving only a little over 500,000 disciples who escaped with injuries. Just as Xiao Hua had said, news of this battle spread throughout the hidden immortal continent in less than half a day. The shock this battle brought to the Confucian cultivators was even greater than before. The Fortune Gate and Daoist Xiao had already become invincible in the 9 continents. The masters of the 2 pure palaces watched as Wen Chu released the 500,000 aristocratic clan disciples. Their eyes held some regret, but at the same time, there was some joy. They glanced at each other, flew into the clouds, and saluted Feng Wu. "We greet the starry sky great sage." Feng Wu didn't slack off either. He transformed into his human form and returned the greeting with cupped fists. "Greetings, Lord of Supreme Purity Palace." "Greetings, Lord of Supreme Purity Palace." The Tai Ching Palace Master respectfully said, "The starry sky great sage has come from afar to the hidden immortal continent. We did not know and failed to welcome you. Please forgive us, forgive us." "It's fine." Feng Wu waved his hand and said, "This saint only came to the soaring Dragon Mountain range to visit an old friend. Being able to come here is just a coincidence. You don't need to mind." Speaking up to here, Feng Wu smiled and cupped his fists at Xiao Hua. "Fellow Daoist Xiao, this saint will not disturb you. Farewell." "Many thanks for today's matter, Feng Wu." Xiao Hua cupped his fists and said with a smile, "When I have time in the future, this Xiao will personally go to the Great Sage Hall to express his gratitude." "Well said, well said." Feng Wu revealed his demon form and prepared to flap his wings. This saint and Peng Sage will be waiting for Master Zhao's arrival. Feng Wu. Seeing Feng Wu and Xiao Hua being so close, and that Feng Wu was about to leave, the Tai Ching Palace Master hurriedly said, "The sutra seeking extreme bliss is about to end. The Immortal Palace and Thunder Temple have jointly invited Feng Wu and Peng Sage from the Great Sage Hall to attend the ceremony." Before the Sutra Seeking Extreme Bliss, Feng Wu did not enter the Great Sage Hall. Now that the Sutra Seeking Extreme Bliss is over, Feng Wu should also come to attend the ceremony. Feng Wu smiled and said, "Before this saint left the Great Sage Hall, I did not hear Peng Sage mention this matter. Wait for him to mention it to this saint." With that said, Feng Wu flapped his wings and disappeared in the blink of an eye. "Fellow Daoist Xiao." The lightning Daoist looked at the celestial being and said, "I and fellow Daoist Tian will take the Fortune Gate's disciples back first. Who knows if Immortal Emperor Gaochen and the 4 great clans will attack the soaring Dragon Mountain range at the same time. To fight with these Confucian cultivators, other than strength, we also need to compete in cunning." The Tai Ching Palace Master blushed slightly and was about to speak, but the Tai Ching Palace Master transmitted a few words to him, and he shut his mouth again. Xiao Hua smiled and said, "Then I'll have to trouble fellow Daoist Lei Ting." Then, the lightning Daoist and the celestial being left with the remaining Fortune Gate's disciples. Seeing that everyone had left, the Tai Ching Palace Master smiled and said, "Master Xiao Lei, can we stay behind and talk in detail?" Xiao Hua shook his head and said, "I'm sure the two of you know the purpose of this Zhao's visit." Saying this, Xiao Hua looked at the Tai Ching Palace Master. "What purpose?" The Tai Ching Palace Master was stunned and looked at Xiao Hua with confusion. Xiao Hua was stunned and asked curiously, "Why did fellow Daoist set up the Milky Way Grand Formation here?" The Tai Ching Palace Master looked at the Tai Ching Palace Master and explained, "This king was originally wandering the hidden immortal continent when I suddenly received the Immortal Palace's secret order to set up a formation here. In order to fulfill my promise to the Immortal Palace, this king had no choice but to do this. As for the purpose of setting up the formation, this king did not know before, everything was coordinated by the fifth princess. Of course, when I saw the fortune gate and the four great clans appear, this king understood a lot. Just now, the fifth princess passed down the immortal emperor's secret order. The Tai Ching palace master did not finish his words, and he even glanced at Wen Chu before he finished speaking. However, Xiaohua understood that Chao Mui's plan was not out of Dongfang Qionghao's expectations. The immortal palace was planning to take advantage of the sandpiper and clams fight. In fact, they might even be planning to kill Wen Chu. This immortal emperor Go Chen is too cunning. Xiaohua sighed inwardly. No wonder Xian once said that the immortal palace is inferior to the mortal world. However, when he thought about how ruthless Dongfang Qiongao and the others were, abandoning hundreds of thousands of disciples after seeing that they were no match for the immortal palace, Xiaohua shook his head helplessly. The hidden immortal continent is so big, and the four great clans and the 100 schools of philosophers are so arrogant. I'm afraid only an ambitious character like immortal Emperor Gochen can suppress them, right? The Tai Ching Palace Master does not know. When the Tai Ching Palace Master saw this, he hurriedly said, Daoist Shao is now our immortal palace's lightning master. Then, the Tai Ching Palace Master told him about how Xiaohua had forced the immortal palace's southern heavenly gate. The Tai Ching Palace Master was a sentimental person, and when he heard that Xiaohua had attacked the southern heavenly gate for the sake of Xian, his heart was already filled with admiration. The way he looked at Xiaohua was no longer as guarded as before, and there was even a hint of apology in his eyes. When the Tai Ching Palace Master finished speaking, the Tai Ching Palace Master bowed and said, Lightning Master Xiao, this king had no choice, please forgive me. It's fine, it's fine. Xiaohua hurriedly returned the bow. The ignorant person is not guilty. Moreover, isn't there a saying that goes no discord, no concord? Good. The Tai Ching Palace Master was relieved that he was forgiven, but soon after, he frowned again. He lowered his head to look at the abyss and said, Lightning Master Xiao, this king was only following orders to set up the formation, and did not know whether the heaven punishment prison crystal where the 9th princess was imprisoned was at the bottom of the abyss. Moreover, this matter. As he said this, the Tai Ching Palace Master looked at the Tai Ching Palace Master with a troubled expression. The Tai Ching Palace Master continued, If Lightning Master Xiao wants to find the heaven punishment prison crystal, it is not now. After we finish speaking, Lightning Master Xiao can go down and look for it. The two of us do not have immortal Emperor Go Chen's orders, so it is not good for us to stay and help. Troublesome. Xiaohua naturally wanted to find the heaven punishment prison crystal that was imprisoning Xian as soon as possible. However, in order to avoid the Tai Ching Palace Master, he was afraid that they would discover the secret of his clone, so he sent Feng Wu, Celestial Being, and Lightning Master away a step earlier. He did not even leave behind the Fortune Gate disciples, especially the Kunlun mirror that was taken away by Celestial Being. At this time, he did not have any more people to help him explore the abyss. Forget it, it is not now. Xiaohua pondered for a moment and said with a smile, No matter, we will talk about it in detail when we land. When the four of them landed, they looked at each other in dismay. None of them knew what to say. The Tai Ching Palace Master pondered for a moment, then said to the Tai Ching Palace Master with a smile, This matter started because of you, you should speak first. The Tai Ching Palace Master smiled bitterly. He pinched his chin and pondered for a long time before saying, This matter is also a long story. Other than the Tai Ching Palace Master, no one in the Immortal Palace knows about this secret, not even the Pure Jade Palace Master. However, since the Scholar Palace Master and Lightning Master Xiao are involved in this secret, then this king will casually speak. While speaking, the Tai Ching Palace Master waved his hand and laid down a defensive array. Xiaohua nodded inwardly. The legend of the tender-like water sword was indeed different from the real situation. The real Pear Blossom Fairy was a woman who dared to love and hate. Moreover, she was not abandoned by the Tai Ching Palace Master. However, this Pear Blossom Fairy was too domineering. She insisted that the Tai Ching Palace Master at that time marry her and give her a status. Although the Tai Ching Palace Master loved her and was willing to marry her, he was in the immortal palace after all. He had his own responsibilities and difficulties. The Pear Blossom Fairy believed him at first and waited for hundreds of years. However, he did not come to propose marriage. Thus, the Pear Blossom Fairy held her sword and forced her way to the southern heavenly gate to ask for an explanation. The guards of the Heavenly King Palace at the southern heavenly gate naturally would not allow the Pear Blossom Fairy to enter the immortal palace, even if she had his token. However, it was also because of the token that the guards did not make things difficult for the Pear Blossom Fairy. Unfortunately, the Pear Blossom Fairy had a fiery temper. After waiting for several days and seeing the immortal generals rolling their eyes at her, how could she endure it? She actually forgot her original intention and clashed with the guards of the southern heavenly gate, wanting to barge into the southern heavenly gate. The Heavenly King Palace's immortal soldiers and immortal generals naturally did not dare to neglect their duties and fought with the Pear Blossom Fairy. The tender-like-water sword was indeed powerful. Although it did not kill tens of thousands of immortal soldiers with a single sword strike, it still killed hundreds of immortal soldiers and injured several immortal generals. Chapter 46-27. As a result, the Heavenly King Palace was enraged, and so was the immortal Emperor of the Lingyun Palace. Li Hua Fairy could not even leave the southern heavenly gate, much less find the master of Xianxia Palace. Just as Li Hua Fairy was heavily injured by the generals, the master of Xianxia Palace flew out of the palace with Celestial Empress's decree, ordering the generals to stop. At that time, Li Hua Fairy's heart had already given up. When she saw the master of Xianxia Palace appear and injure the immortal generals in front of her, she attacked the master of Xianxia Palace with her sword of tenderness. The master of Xianxia Palace did not dare to block her and hurriedly fled, leading Li Hua Fairy away from the southern heavenly gate to Chaomuya. Of course, Chaomuya was not Chaomuya at that time, and he was not like this. After Li Hua Fairy left, the Heavenly King Palace found out that Celestial Empress's decree was fake and immediately reported it to Celestial Empress. Celestial Empress was also furious and ordered the Heavenly King Palace to send troops to kill her. Although Xianxia Palace's master lured Li Hua Fairy away from the immortal palace, Li Hua Fairy was stubborn and did not listen to his explanation. At that time, Xianxia Palace's master was weak and was almost injured by the sword of tenderness, so the two could not escape far before they were blocked by the Heavenly King Palace's immortal soldiers in front of Chaomuya. At the right time, the setting sun was like blood, the heavenly river poured, and the connate heavy water fell, corroding the entire space. The star river sand fell, destroying everything within tens of thousands of miles. A heavenly river separated Xianxia Palace's master and Li Hua Fairy. The separation of the heavenly river was only temporary, but the separation of their hearts was eternal. Even if Xianxia Palace's master wanted to die with Li Hua Fairy, he could not. Xianxia Palace's master had no choice but to kneel beside the heavenly river and beg the furious Celestial Empress to agree to what he was unwilling to do, including the promise to kill Xiaohua today. Fortunately, Xianxia Palace's master was begging Celestial Empress. Celestial Empress felt Li Hua Fairy's deep love, so she did not use the Star River formation to destroy Li Hua Fairy's soul. Instead, she let her enter reincarnation after killing her. As for the legendary tenderness-like-water sword, it was shattered by the stellar river sand in the Grand Galaxy formation, and it turned into fragments that fell into the spatial vortex created by the corrosion of the natural heavy water before disappearing. With the death of the Pear Blossom Fairy, the master of Supreme Purity Palace naturally wanted to search for tenderness-like-water's whereabouts. However, strangely enough, there were no fragments of the sword anywhere near Chaomuya, nor was there anywhere within 10,000 miles. Furthermore, the master of Xianxia Palace had been searching the vicinity of Chaomu Cliff for more than 10 years, but to no avail. The Xianxia Palace master was very confused because this tenderness-like-water sword was a token of love between him and Fairy Li Hua. Not only had Fairy Li Hua refined it, but he had also refined it with the Immortal Palace's secret technique. If it was within 10,000 kilometers of day and night cliff, even if he couldn't find the exact location, he should be able to sense the presence of this fragment. After the love affair with Li Hua Fairy, the master of Xianxia Palace was very dispirited. However, the responsibility of the sect forced him to cultivate diligently. At that time, the current master of the Supreme Purity Palace, was one of his few good friends. The two of them often comprehended cultivation techniques together and gained experience together. As a result, their cultivation became increasingly profound. Later on, by chance, the two of them obtained the Thunder Temple's secret reincarnation technique. At that time, the two of them were cultivating the Immortal Palace's doppelganger technique. Their aptitudes were naturally rare in the world. When they were reflecting on each other's insights, the two of them suddenly had a strange idea and attempted to add the secret reincarnation technique into their doppelganger technique. This attempt was naturally blind, and they didn't place any hopes on it. However, after a few attempts, they actually succeeded. Moreover, very coincidentally, both of their doppelgangers were reincarnated on the Dawn Rain continent. One of them became Enlightened Bright Sword of the White Sect, and the other naturally became Li Xiubai of the Flame Bamboo Sword Sect. When Li Xiubai's cultivation was still shallow, nothing abnormal happened. However, when his cultivation entered the sword transformation realm, the primordial spirit of the master of Xianxia Palace awakened, and Li Xiubai knew of his origins. Moreover, what made Li Xiubai ecstatic was that he actually sensed the presence of tenderness like water's fragments on the Dawn Rain continent. However, he still couldn't accurately find the location of these fragments. He could only sense 9 weak presences of different sizes. Thinking of his sword cultivation's sword pellet, Li Xiubai determined that after this tenderness like water sword was shattered, it turned into 9 sword pellets. Therefore, according to his understanding of these perceptions, he nurtured 9 similar sword pellets. He prepared to use these 9 sword pellets as an opportunity to find the real tenderness like water sword after he became famous on the Dawn Rain continent. The primordial spirit of the master of Xianxia Palace awakened, and the doppelganger of the master of Tai Qing Palace who turned into Enlightened Bright Sword naturally also awakened. Since the doppelganger reincarnated as a Dao cultivator, Enlightened Bright Sword simply cultivated Dao techniques. It was different from what Xiaohua knew, and also different from the wills left behind by Enlightened Bright Sword and Li Xiubai. Enlightened Bright Sword looked for Li Xiubai. Not to challenge him, but only to find him. Before reincarnating, the 2 original bodies had done something to the doppelganger to find him. However, the development of the matter exceeded their expectations. The difference between Dao and sword in the Dawn Rain continent seemed to be even more severe than the difference between Daoist and Confucian in the hidden Immortal continent. A sword cultivator and a Dao cultivator were unlikely to become good friends, and also unlikely to help each other in cultivation. And it was even more impossible for Li Xiubai to find the whereabouts of the tenderness like water sword's fragments in the Dao cultivator 3 kingdoms. Li Xiubai also entrusted this matter to Enlightened Bright Sword, but Enlightened Sword didn't have Li Xiubai's perception, so he naturally didn't obtain anything. In the end, Li Xiubai could only use the banner of challenging Enlightened Sword to come to the Dao cultivator 3 kingdoms, preparing to find the tenderness like water sword. However, fate made fools of people. Before Li Xiubai could truly begin his exploration, a problem occurred with the doppelganger technique. Li Xiubai and Enlightened Sword faced a life and death trial. Thus, Li Xiubai and Enlightened Sword joined hands to deceive the sword cultivators and Dao cultivators of the Dawn Rain continent. They hid in the inkcloud black forest and used the sword intent of the tenderness like water sword's fragments as a token to set up a secret trap. The 2 of them died in the cave that Xiaohua had entered. Li Xiubai and Enlightened Sword naturally couldn't write down the real truth. They only wrote down a part of the truth and left behind the cultivation technique and comprehension that they could leave behind, waiting for the cultivator who obtained the tenderness like water sword's fragments to obtain these cultivation techniques. Of course, Li Xiubai also had a selfish motive for leaving behind this cultivation technique. He could rely on this cultivation technique to easily find this cultivator in the next reincarnation. After Li Xiubai and Enlightened Sword died, their primordial spirit doppelganger once again entered the cycle of reincarnation. Although the 2 primordial spirits successfully returned to the bodies of the masters of the Supreme Purity Palace and Tai Purity Palace, they weren't as complete as the reincarnations of the Buddhist sect. The information they received wasn't particularly clear. Later on, the masters of the 2 Purity Palace used their secret technique many times, but it was never as perfect as this. Even the realm they arrived at wasn't the Dawn Rain continent anymore. After explaining the cause of the matter in detail or in brief, the master of the Supreme Purity Palace stared at Wen Chu and asked, "Let's not talk about the specifics first. Wen Chu Palace Master, tell this king first, where is the fragment of the tenderness like water sword? Is it the country of Jiang or the country of Shi?" Seeing the urgency of the master of the Supreme Purity Palace, Xiaohua finally woke up as if he had been enlightened. As it turned out, the 9 stars transverse sun sword pill he obtained from the Imperial Thunder sect were the 9 fragments of the number 1 imperial weapon of the hidden immortal continent. If nothing unexpected happened, after the Milky Way formation shattered the tenderness like water sword, a passage similar to the one Xiaohua encountered appeared in the sky above Chaomu Cliff. The fragments entered the passage and turned into 9 sword pills that fell into the Dawn Rain continent. Then, they were obtained by the disciples of the Imperial Thunder sect and sent to the treasury. Of course, when Xiaohua's primordial spirit was weak, his middle dantian was sealed. Xiaohua didn't separate his primordial spirit to cultivate true energy. Instead, he separated a strand of his primordial spirit and sent it into the Dream Slayer's sword pill. Later on, when the seal on Xiaohua's middle dantian was removed, he separated this strand of primordial spirit from the sword pill and sent it to his middle dantian to cultivate the true energy of a Confucian cultivator. The sword intent of the 9 sword pills was also sent to his middle dantian to be nurtured by the Buddhist fire. However, in the end, Wen Chu's primordial spirit still came from the 9 stars transverse sun sword pill, which meant that it came from the tenderness like water sword. The pear blossom fairy's consciousness also remained in Wen Chu's consciousness. This was also the reason why Wen Chu's abnormality occurred when he approached Chaomu Cliff. Of course, Wen Chu was also a blessing in disguise. He understood love, hate, and sorrow from the consciousness of the pear blossom fairy, and when he transformed into a flying sword to fight with the Xianyuan sword, he cut off this consciousness and completely integrated with the real human emotions such as love, hate, sorrow, and sorrow. This made him the first doppelganger of Xiaohua to have his own human emotions, and also the first doppelganger to become a real body. Hearing the Xianxia Palace Master's words, Wen Chu smiled, knowing that this was the Xianxia Palace Master's test. He replied, "Xianxia Palace Master, I'm afraid you remembered wrongly. Xiaoyu continent doesn't have a Jiang country, only the Huan country of sword cultivators, the Lian country of Dao cultivators, the Meng country, the Shi country, and the millions of Meng mountains. Io, isn't that so?" The Xianxia Palace Master glanced at the Tai Qing Palace Master, and both of their eyes revealed a smile. The Xianxia Palace Master smiled and said, "Our primordial spirits have gone through reincarnation, and our consciousness has become blurry. We can't remember these things clearly. I won't hide it from Xianxia Palace Master." Wen Chu pointed at Xiaohua and said, "The one who truly obtained the tenderness like water sword fragment wasn't me, but perfected Xiao. He's a disciple of the Imperial Thunder sect in the Shi country, and he obtained it from the Imperial Thunder sect's treasury." Following that, Xiaohua continued and recounted how he obtained the 9 stars soaring sun sword pill without hiding anything. After Xiaohua finished speaking, Wen Chu continued, "After perfected Xiao obtained the sword pill, he didn't know how to nurture a sword because he wasn't a sword cultivator. The 9 sword pills formed from the tenderness like water sword had always been with him. Later on, during the Sword Dao War, he followed the Imperial Thunder sect disciples to Sky Patrol City and fought with the sword cultivators of my Huan country in the Sword Tomb. That war was a stalemate, and perfected Xiao was ordered to infiltrate the Huan country. At that time, I was only a disciple of the Huan country's Clear Stream Sword sect. As my sect was weak, I didn't participate in the war. I met perfected Xiao somewhere in the Huan country, and like the two of you, we hit it off at first sight. We became sworn brothers, and he gave me the 9 sword pills." Chapter 46-28. Then, Wen Chu recounted Xiaohua's experience in Inkcloud Black Forest. It was similar to the real situation, but there was an extra Wen Chu. Xiaohua was also helping Wen Chu. Wen Chu's so-called Clear Stream Sword sect did not exist, so he did not care about the High Purity Palace Master's questions. In the end, Wen Chu looked at the High Purity Palace Master and said with a smile, "The High Purity Palace Master's secret move is really powerful. If Daoist Xiao did not block the sword for me that day, I would have died in Inkcloud Black Forest." Hee hee. The High Purity Palace Master smiled and said, "What I left in the cave is the secret art of Confucianism. How can I let others take it away? How can I do it without some powerful means?" Daoist Xiao happened to have a shaman puppet from Million Meng Mountain, otherwise his soul would have been scattered. Wen Chu was the same as Xiao Hua. He spoke 9 sentences of truth and 1 sentence of lie. The High Purity Palace Master did not notice anything strange. One who survives a great disaster will have good fortune in the future. The High Purity Palace Master smiled and said, "Daoist Xiao, aren't you a Daoist Mahayana realm cultivator, the lightning master of my immortal palace?" The High Purity Palace Master also asked some questions and finally smiled and said, "Oh right, where is the sword intent I left in the cave?" The Wen Chu Palace Master did not seem to have it. "Oh, that sword intent was divided into 2. Wen Chu smiled and said, "One was given to Yu Zhongxuan and the other to Chang Yuan." That day, Yu Zhongxuan ran away from the marriage. Because of this sword intent, the 2 of them became a couple. So that's how it is. The High Purity Palace Master clapped and said with a smile, "This king's sword intent can be used as a matchmaker. This is really beyond my expectations." In that case, Yu Zhongxuan and Chang Yuan are also this king's disciples. Indeed. Wen Chu smiled and said, "Now, the 2 of them are at the Soaring Dragon Mountain Range's Fortune Gate. If you have time, this old man invites Daoist Xiao to bring them to the High Purity Palace." Okay. The High Purity Palace Master agreed. After the Tai Ching Palace Master finished speaking, the Xianxia Palace Master opened his mouth, as if he wanted to ask something, but seemed to have some misgivings. Xiao Hua knew that he might want to ask about the Sword Heart Elemental Seed Technique and the Primordial Spirit Strengthening Technique. He thought for a moment, and simply took the initiative to ask, "That's right, other than the deer sword intent, the 2 immortals also left 2 secret techniques in the cave." At that time, fellow Daoist Wen Chu and I didn't know much about it. But later on, when our cultivations deepened, we realized that these 2 secret techniques were infinitely profound. There were even traces of the Primordial Spirit Division and the External Incarnation Technique. I wonder. The Master of the Xianxia Palace smiled and asked, "Have Master Xiao Lei and the Master of the Wuxia Palace cultivated it?" "To tell you the truth, Master of the Xianxia Palace," Wen Chu said with a smile, "when we got the secret skill, we were overjoyed. We started to practice it after we left the Inkcloud Black Forest. However, we found that there was a great danger in it. Although it was a divine skill to practice the flying sword, there was a danger of stepping on air if we wanted to improve it further. Therefore, we didn't practice it too much without full confidence." "Alas, you didn't practice it too much." "That's right." The Master of the Xianxia Palace sighed and said, "This cultivation technique has a great flaw. Although we tried our best to fix it, we couldn't perfect it. We tried it many times. If it weren't for the Buddhist sect's reincarnation technique, I'm afraid we would have died long ago. Actually, it's not that we didn't understand it. It's just that our Confucian cloning technique has a flaw compared to the external incarnation technique of the demon clan." The Master of the Tai Ching Palace didn't hide it and explained, "The demon clan's cloning technique is generally weaker than the main body, and the cloning technique is easily controlled by the main body. However, the cloning technique of the Confucian cloning technique cultivates the cloning technique, and the cultivation level of the cloning technique may not be controlled by the main body. It's easy to control the cloning technique when it's weaker than the main body. However, if the main body is surpassed by the cloning technique, the main body may be devoured, and the cloning technique will be destroyed at the same time. Of course, in extreme cases, the cloning technique may also kill the main body." The Master of the Xianxia Palace added, "There were a few times when we encountered this kind of situation and had no choice but to kill the cloning technique. We were also afraid of the backlash. Later on, we discovered that the most fundamental reason wasn't the cultivation method, but a problem with a law in the human world. We can't explain what this law is, but as long as this law exists, our human race may never be able to cultivate a real out-of-body incarnation." Xiao Hua naturally knew that the law the Master of the Xianxia Palace was talking about was the essence. After all, the cultivators of the mortal realm couldn't cultivate more essence for their cloning technique. Therefore, for a cloning technique to become a cloning technique, it had to obtain essence from the main body. If the cloning technique's strength surpassed the main body, it would inevitably obtain more essence. If the main body lost essence, it would naturally suffer a backlash. At this point, the primordial spirit-splitting technique had come to an end. Xiaohua decided not to mention it again to avoid arousing the suspicion of the master of the Liangqing Palace. Afterward, the master of the Liangqing Palace casually asked about the Dawn Rain continent, and Xiaohua and Wenqiu calmly answered. However, to Xiaohua's surprise, the master of the Liangqing Palace didn't ask how Xiaohua came to the 3 continents. It seemed that they also knew that Xiaohua wouldn't tell them, or they had already lost interest in the Dawn Rain continent. Xiaohua originally wanted to take the opportunity to ask, but thinking about how much the master of the Xianxia Palace cared about the fragments of the sword of tenderness like water, after the cloning technique reincarnated, he would definitely try his best to find the location of the Dawn Rain continent. Now that he was already the master of the Xianxia Palace, if he still couldn't go to the Dawn Rain continent, it must be that he hadn't found the spatial vein to go to the Dawn Rain continent. It was also possible that, as Fairy Xingyu said, there was no spatial passage from the 3 continents to the Dawn Rain continent. Therefore, Xiaohua didn't want to ask any more. Seeing the change of dawn and dusk on the morning and evening cliff and the rolling clouds under the abyss, Xiaohua smiled and said, "Master of the Xianxia Palace, Master of the Tai Qing Palace, since we have already revealed the secret, there's no need to hide too much from each other. In the future, we will all be in the hidden immortal continent, and there will be plenty of time to talk about it in detail. I'm already a little anxious at this time." The masters of the Xianxia Palace naturally understood Xiaohua's meaning and stood up. Just as the master of the Tai Qing Palace was about to speak, the master of the Xianxia Palace said anxiously, "Master Xiaolei, this king still has one last thing to discuss with Master Immortal. Master Xiaolei, please wait for a moment." Xiaohua's heart moved, and he nodded slightly in reply. The master of the Xianxia Palace looked at Wenqiu and said in a low voice, "Master Immortal, this king has a presumptuous request. I hope Master Immortal can consider it." "Oh. Master of the Xianxia Palace, please speak." Wenqiu raised her eyebrows and said curiously. "That." The master of the Xianxia Palace hesitated for a moment and said, "Tenderness like water is the token of love between this king and Fairy Li Hua. If nothing unexpected happens, there must be information about Fairy Li Hua's reincarnation within it. This king's only regret in this life is that I can't obtain Fairy Li Hua's forgiveness, and my only hope is to obtain tenderness like water." Now, although the 9 stars soaring sun sword pellet has already been refined by Master Immortal, if Master Immortal erases the projection of your soul, this king still has the confidence to refine these sword pellets into the true tenderness like water. The master of the Tai Qing Palace also said in a low voice at the side, "This king is also clear about the master of the Xianxia Palace's thoughts. If possible, could Master Immortal return this tenderness like water to the master of the Xianxia Palace? Even if he has to pay some price, it's also possible." Wenqiu was a bit embarrassed and looked at Xiaohua. Xiaohua waved his hand and said, "Fellow Immortal, although this 9 stars soaring sun sword pellet was obtained by this Xiao has already given it to Fellow Immortal. Fellow Immortal, you can make your own decision." Speaking of the 9 stars soaring sun sword pellet, Wenqiu really didn't want to return it to the master of the Xianxia Palace. After all, this sword pellet could be said to be Wenqiu's earliest shell. How could he bear to give it away? But thinking about Fairy Li Hua's miserable appearance just now, and thinking about how the master of the Xianxia Palace had taken risks time and time again, wasn't it all to find the tenderness like water sword? If he took this sword pellet, although it would be a souvenir, Fairy Li Hua would never be able to see the master of the Xianxia Palace ever again. Therefore, when Shu pondered for a moment, raised his head and looked at the master of the Xianxia Palace, and asked, "This old man can give you the tenderness like water sword. However, this is not called returning it." Of course, this is not called returning it." The master of the Xianxia Palace was overjoyed and hurriedly answered, "This king will exchange it with Master Immortal at all costs." Xianyuan's sword. Wen Chu lightly spat out 3 words. Ah. You want the Xianyuan sword? The master of the Shangqing Palace and the master of the Tai Qing Palace were both stunned. Yes. Wen Chu nodded affirmatively. The master of the Shangqing Palace smiled bitterly and said, Master Immortal, you probably don't know what this Xianyuan sword means, right? That day, this king didn't dare to agree to Fairy Li Hua's request and didn't want to yield to the Immortal Palace because I didn't want to get this Xianyuan sword. Oh. Is there something fishy about it? Wen Chu asked curiously. The master of the Tai Qing Palace shook his head. This matter can't be discussed by us. If you want it, I'm sure the master of the Shangqing Palace will definitely be willing to give it to you. However, Master Immortal must think clearly. Wen Chu lowered his head and pondered. He didn't look at Xiao Hua. However, after a moment, he raised his head and said, This old man has decided. The master of the Shangqing Palace can exchange the Xianyuan sword for the tenderness like water sword. Good. The master of the Shangqing Palace didn't hesitate. He raised his hand and took the Xianyuan sword and its scabbard from his waist, and handed it to Wen Chu. Seeing that the master of the Shangqing Palace was so straightforward, Wen Chu was instead a little surprised. However, after thinking for a moment, he took the Xianyuan sword and hung it on his waist. He had already refined it with 5-colored true energy in his middle dantian and wiped out the primordial spirit's shadow and all the other sword intents inside. When the master of the Shangqing Palace received the 9 sword intents, he opened his mouth again and spat out the sword pills that had been refined for who knows how many years. He raised his hand and pointed, and the 9 sword intents respectively fell into the 9 sword pills. Buzz. The 9 sword pills rushed out different sword lights and danced around the master of the Shangqing Palace lively. Many thanks, Master Immortal. Many thanks, Master Xiao Lei. The master of the Shangqing Palace was full of smiles. He opened his mouth again and swallowed the 9 sword pills into his stomach. He cupped his hands towards Wen Chu and Xiao Hua and said, This king will take his leave. If you have time, you can come to the Shangqing Palace for a drink. Farewell. The master of the Tai Qing Palace was also happy. He nodded towards Wen Chu and Xiao Hua and put away the defensive formation. Then, the master of the 2 Purities Palace turned into multicolored light and rushed into the earth, fire, wind, and thunder, disappearing without a trace. Chapter 46-29. After the 2 left, Xiao Hua frowned and said, Fellow Immortal, those 9 sword pills are very important to you. Why did you exchange for the Xianyuan sword of unknown origin for no reason? Look at how casual the master of Shangqing Palace is, the Xianyuan sword is like a burden. Wen Chu smiled and handed the Xianyuan sword to Xiao Hua. Although the sword pills are important to me, the Xianyuan sword is even more important to you. If you don't take advantage of the fact that the immortal emperor doesn't know, how can you have the chance in the future? You. Xiao Hua was stunned and said in disbelief, You exchanged it for I? If not for you, who else would I exchange it for? Wen Chu stuffed the Xianyuan sword into Xiao Hua's hand and said, You and I are one. What you think is naturally what I think. Xiao Hua took the Xianyuan sword, and his heart warmed. The previous unhappiness of losing something disappeared in an instant, and an even warmer feeling was born. This feeling is really good. Xiao Hua couldn't help but sigh. At this moment, Xiao Hua had no time to look at the Xianyuan sword. Although in his heart, he felt that since the master of Shangqing Palace had given the Xianyuan sword to Wen Chu so easily, although he didn't have any evil intentions, the Xianyuan sword itself might not be without any tricks. After Xiao Hua put the Xianyuan sword into the space, he said, We'll talk about this later. Fellow Immortal, come with I to explore the abyss now. Hee hee. Wen Chu laughed and raised his hand to take out the mountain river seal. He blinked his eyes at Xiao Hua and replied, Master Xiao Lei is used to working hard, but you forgot that this old man also has a nation weapon here. Some of my disciples are also cultivating in it. The abyss is so big, and you and I have limited energy. Why don't we ask them to help? Haha. Xiao Hua slapped his forehead and laughed. I really forgot about this. My Kunlun mirror was taken away by a celestial, so I neglected my disciples. As they spoke, Wen Chu activated the mountain and river seal, and Xiao Hua sent out tens of thousands of disciples from the Xinhua continent. The two of them gave their orders, and the disciples immediately flew into the abyss. Seeing the dense clouds covering the disciples, Xiao Hua felt warmth in his heart. He looked at Wen Chu and said, "It feels good to have a home." "Yes, I think so too." Wen Chu's face was also filled with emotion, and he was about to rush into the abyss as well. At this moment, Xiao Hua's heart was moved again, and he said, "Fellow immortal, please go ahead. I've just gained some insights, and I need to comprehend them for a moment." Wen Chu naturally knew what Xiao Hua was thinking and said with a smile, "Since that's the case, I'll stand guard for you by the side. With so many disciples working hard, I can also rest for half a day." "All right," Xiao Hua said as he sat down cross-legged, releasing his consciousness to collect the souls from the previous battle. The battle did not last long, and the casualties among the Fortune Gate's disciples were very light. Xiao Hua was not in a hurry to collect the souls. Later, when the two Purities Palace's master appeared, Xiao Hua did not dare to use his divine ability. Only now did he have the time to collect the souls. In less than half a day, Xiao Hua had collected all the remnant souls from the array formation. Just as he was about to follow Wen Chu down to the abyss to search, 100 Fortune Gate disciples carefully flew out from the abyss with a heaven punishment prison crystal in their hands. Ah! So fast. Not to mention Wen Chu, even Xiao Hua was dumbfounded. Wen Chu said that she wanted the Fortune Gate disciples to search for the heaven punishment prison crystal in the abyss, but in reality, she wanted them to search for any abnormalities in the abyss. After all, the heaven punishment prison crystal was personally suppressed by immortal Emperor Go Chen. How could these Fortune Gate disciples find it so easily? Even Xiao Hua and Wen Chu were prepared to use their great divine abilities. Could it be? Xiao Hua had an ominous premonition in his heart. Wen Chu hurriedly comforted, "Fellow immortal, don't worry. Although immortal Emperor Go Chen is an immortal emperor who rules the immortal palace and intimidates the 100 schools of thought, he is still a father. Xin is also his biological daughter. Even a vicious tiger will not eat its own cubs. He might have left a little bit of his family here." Xiao Hua sneered, looking at the disciples flying over happily, and replied indifferently, "If that's the case, the East Sea Empress wouldn't have said that he has changed. He even hates his own wife, what else can't he give up? The relationship between husband and wife seems to be a little different from familial love, right?" Wen Chu was a little emotional at the beginning, so she didn't dare to be arbitrary and said in a low voice. Xiao Hua instantly thought of his home in the Guozhuang house and nodded, "I hope immortal Emperor Go Chen's last bit of familial love hasn't been extinguished." The disciples respectfully handed the heaven punishment prison crystal to Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua wasn't in a hurry to break the inscription chains on the crystal. Instead, he ordered, "Go and search again, see if there are any abnormalities." When Wen Chu heard this, she opened her mouth and wanted to say something, but she hesitated. After all the disciples left, Wen Chu said in a low voice, "Generally, 2 heaven punishment prison crystals won't be placed together because the inscription chains between them will affect each other." "I know." Xiao Hua nodded, looked at the heaven punishment prison crystal in his hand, and handed it to Wen Chu. Wen Chu threw the heaven punishment prison crystal into the air, and with a slap on the top of her head, a 5-colored giant hand grabbed down from the air. Boom! Even the heaven's punishment prison crystal that was personally sealed by immortal Emperor Go Chen disintegrated in an instant under Wen Chu's Xinqi. Seeing the chains collapsing and the inscriptions shattering, the sky was filled with layers of lightning and shadows. An immortal palace inspector swayed and flew out. His majestic voice was like thunder as he said, "How dare you? Who dares to touch my immortal palace's heaven's punishment prison crystal?" "It's Xiao Hua." Xiao Hua didn't use any divine ability, and only lightly replied. Although the voice was very soft, when the light shadow passed by, the light shadow instantly trembled. The arrogant aura from before immediately disappeared. A tall inspector with a clear face revealed himself awkwardly. He bowed and said, Junior greets Master Xiao Lei and the Master of the Scholar Palace. Junior didn't know the two seniors were here, please forgive me. No matter. Xiao Hua understood these inspectors very well, and said with a smile, this is your duty, how can this old man blame you? This old man was ordered by the immortal emperor to break the seal, you only need to go back and report. Yes, Junior understands. Seeing that Xiao Hua even brought out immortal Emperor Go Chen, the inspector didn't dare to say anything more. He looked at the light somewhat pitifully, and still didn't dare to leave without permission. Xiao Hua was displeased, but he still said, since that's the case, you can wait here for a moment. Many thanks for Master Xiao Lei's sympathy, many thanks for Master Xiao Lei's sympathy. The inspector was abnormally happy. Boom. At this moment, an aura of the immortal palace and the laws of heaven and earth soared into the sky from the light. Tens of thousands of heaven punishment prison crystal fragments also scattered in all directions. Xiao Hua was too lazy to care about these minor details, and his eyes unblinkingly stared at the light. Unfortunately, where the light dimmed, where the aura dissipated, there was an empty space. The new princess who was supposed to be imprisoned was actually not there. Damned Go Chen. You actually dared to play with me. Xiao Hua roared angrily. Looking at the horizon, the inspector next to him, who was about to use his divine ability to collect the heaven punishment prison crystal fragments, trembled in fear and stopped on the spot. Let's go. How could Xiao Hua be willing to accept this? He urged his body to rush into the abyss, and Wen Chu naturally followed him. Seeing that a Master Xiao Lei and an immortal master had left, the inspector shrunk his neck and hurriedly collected the heaven punishment prison crystal fragments, then hurriedly urged the light to leave this dangerous place. Wen Chu was right. The abyss of the morning and evening cliff looked very dangerous, but there was nothing special below. Tens of thousands of disciples had already searched the area within 100,000 li, but they didn't find anything special. Even when Xiao Hua used his divine ability and used his delirium-piercing Dharma eye to search inch by inch, he still didn't find a second heaven punishment prison crystal. Damn it! Xiao Hua roared angrily on the morning and evening cliff. At this point, how could Xiao Hua not know that he and the four great clans had fallen into immortal Emperor Go Chen's trap? However, he could only curse here. He wanted to attack the immortal palace again. But he couldn't. This was because immortal Emperor Go Chen had clearly stated that Xiao Hua needed to find Princess Xian himself. If he found the real one, then it was his fortune. If he found the fake one, then it was his own incompetence. At this moment, Xiao Hua understood even more clearly that even though he used the karmic hand, immortal Emperor Go Chen must have used a divine ability to reverse yin and yang. The information Xiao Hua obtained through the karmic hand was only a smokescreen released by immortal Emperor Go Chen. As for the Nangong clan and the four great clans, Xiao Hua believed that even if they didn't know anything about foresight, as long as Princess Qing was there, with her jealousy towards Xian, she could casually release some misleading information to lure Nangong Tianji to the morning and evening cliff. Don't worry, fellow immortal. Even though Wen Chu was also a bit anxious, he still comforted Xiao Hua. Princess Xian has been sealed inside the heaven punishment prison crystal for several hundred years, there is no need to rush now. Right now, attacking the immortal palace is meaningless. We should return to the soaring dragon mountain range first. The sutra seeking extreme bliss is about to end. Isn't immortal Emperor Go Chen going to the town of longevity? I will wait there to block him. Block? When Xiao Hua heard Wen Chu's words, the gloominess in his heart disappeared, and he smiled. Immortal friend's use of the word block is very clever. Of course. Wen Chu's eyebrows danced, and it was a bit exaggerated as he said, the Buddhist sect has the Maitreya Buddha, the demon race has the heaven-defying lightning phoenix, the immortal palace has this old man, and the Daoist sect has the Fortune Gates sect master. If facing immortal Emperor Go Chen together, what is it if not the block? Let's go. We will return to the soaring dragon mountain range. Xiao Hua laughed and waved his hand at the surrounding disciples, shouting, along the way, spread the news of our Fortune Gate breaking the alliance of the four great clans at the morning and evening cliff. Yes, disciple understands. The group of Fortune Gate's disciples were also in high spirits, and they replied loudly, "We will obey the sect master's orders, give it as a reward, and thank you for all your support." Chapter 46:30. Xiaohua returned to the Fortune Gate with his victorious army, and the results of the battle at Dawn and Dusk Cliff swept through the entire hidden immortal continent like a tornado. There were those who were gloating over Xiaohua's misfortune, those who were overjoyed, and those who were alarmist, but most of them were eagerly awaiting the reaction of the four families. Unfortunately, the four families were completely oblivious to this and didn't give any response. Zhai Xinglu, on the other hand, announced the details of the battle in full detail, and even revealed the source of the enmity between Xiaohua and the four families. Not only did Zhai Xinglu earn a lot of primordial stones, but it also aroused the hatred of the female cultivators of the hidden immortal continent. Although Confucian cultivators emphasized the parents' orders and the matchmaker's words, which woman didn't yearn for a beautiful, eternal love? Who didn't want to find a partner who could be with them for eternity? Why had the tender emotion sword become the #1 weapon of Confucian cultivators? Wasn't it just the story of an infatuated woman and a heartless noble from the immortal palace? Now, a grand ascension stage human cultivator was standing right before their eyes. This man had fought his way to the southern heavenly gate all by himself, and he had fought against the four most ancient families of Confucian cultivators by himself. He had done all this for the sake of the love in his heart and to give his lover a lifetime of happiness. How could these women not be convinced? Thus, before Xiaohua had even returned to the Fortune Gate, countless stories had already been told. Xiaohua's handsome, stalwart, and infatuated image was tens of thousands of times more arrogant than that of a grand ascension stage human cultivator. Xiao Lei, Xiao Longshi, the Fortune Gate, the soaring dragon mountain ranges, the Xiao Nation, and the new princess had become a must-have topic of conversation, and they were even more famous than the sutra seeking extreme bliss. Even though the Dao Gate's chances of prosperity were still very slim, Xiaohua's rise had already been revealed to the world. Xiaohua naturally received this news as well, and he knew that Bian had done this on purpose. A wry smile appeared on his face, and he had to admit that this method was quite effective. In fact, he felt that the influence of this method was definitely not inferior to that of a grand ascension stage human cultivator. Fellow immortal. Xiaohua looked at the soaring dragon mountain range in the distance with a very depressed expression and said with a smile, "Now I finally understand why the verbal condemnation of Confucian cultivators is more powerful than sabers, spears, swords, and halberds. Perhaps sabers, spears, swords, and halberds can destroy the body, but verbal condemnation can destroy the heart. It's not just the human heart." Wen Chu laughed. "It's simply stepping on people and making them infamy for generations to come. This is also the reason why Fairy Xingyu established Star Moon back then." Xiaohua thought of Su Ji and Fairy Xingyu and said, "Although Senior Su is powerful, his influence in the three continents is far inferior to that of Fairy Xingyu. The ancients once said, even the fragrance of wine fears the depth of the alley. That's the truth." When Chu chimed in, "For the sake of the new princess, fellow immortal is willing to risk his life to fight with the four aristocratic families. If we don't spread the news, who would know?" The four aristocratic families and the immortal palace didn't feel any pressure at all. Now that the four aristocratic families and the immortal palace had become the target of public criticism, I'm sure immortal Emperor Gaochen will find a way to get out of this situation. Bai En is also from the immortal palace. Using the immortal palace's method to deal with the immortal palace is just that old man Gaochen asking for trouble. Xiaohua sneered. Speaking of this, Xiaohua's heart trembled as he thought of something and said, "Let's speed up. This Xiao has some doubts in his heart and needs to discuss them with fellow Daoists." Just as Xiaohua approached the soaring dragon mountain range, the celestial being and the others came to greet him. In fact, they were not much earlier than Xiaohua, but Xiaohua was able to slow down, while the celestial being had returned a few days earlier. Xiaohua received the Kunlun mirror that was returned to him by a heavenly being. Before he could say anything, the group of disciples who had stayed behind bowed respectfully. Looking at their high spirits, they naturally knew about the Fortune Gate's victory. Xiaohua put away the Kunlun mirror, helped the disciples up, and gave them a few words of encouragement before entering the Fortune Gate Palace. Xiaohua sat down on the jade chair. First, he let out Yu Zhongxuan and the other disciples, then he asked Daoist Witch and the other clones to come out. When Daoist Witch came out, there was nothing unusual. When Archfiend Shi came out, the entire soaring dragon mountain range was suddenly covered with golden and black stripes. The moment these stripes appeared, more dragon stripes appeared, and when the dragon stripes changed, more green stripes appeared. Layer after layer of the laws of heaven and earth came surging over like waves. Although the laws of heaven and earth were surging, the disciples couldn't sense them. Most of them were looking at the ripples in the sky, feeling puzzled. This is... Xiaohua was greatly shocked. He hastily summoned the mirror of Kunlun and was about to rise to his feet from the jade chair. Right at this moment, all the Tao of heaven and earth poured down, falling right onto Reverend Yun, Shifiend, Daoist Wu, and even Wen Chu, causing ripples to appear on her body. Haha. Xiaohua felt as if he had lost something, but also gained something more. He suddenly understood. He cupped his fists and said, "Congratulations, fellow Daoist." Reverend Yun, Archfiend Shi, and Daoist Witch stood quietly in midair, not saying a word. The disciples were also silent as they waited quietly. After the time it took to finish a pot of tea, Archfiend Shi said, "Kaka, I understand now. This is..." Xiaohua didn't wait for him to finish. He waved his hand and silenced the surroundings. Reverend Yun opened his eyes and raised his dragon head. With a thunderous voice, he said, "So, this is a dragon. I understand now. The dragon cleansing pool is just the body of a dragon. The so-called dragon nature is far from what I thought." That's right. At this moment, the green gleam in Daoist Witch's eyes slowly faded away as he said, "My Tao is not your Tao, my heart is not your heart, and my nature is not your nature." Xiaohua was happy as well. He turned and looked at the disciples, then waved his hand and said, "You may leave now." Yes, disciple congratulates the sect masters. Although the disciples didn't know what was going on, they knew it was a happy occasion. Therefore, they bowed and congratulated before leaving. After all the disciples left, Xiaohua looked at Lightning Reverend and Celestial Being. Both of them were confused, not knowing what was going on. "Fellow Daoists, don't you feel anything?" Xiaohua was puzzled, so he reminded them. "No." Lightning Reverend and Celestial Being shook their heads. "Never mind." Xiaohua smiled and said, "Everyone has different opportunities. I'm afraid your opportunity has yet to arrive." The strange phenomenon this time was different from Wen Chu's. Wen Chu had only formed his human nature for a short while, and it happened when the High Purity Palace's master was breaking through the knot in his heart. Therefore, no one noticed it. On the other hand, Daoist Witch, Reverend Yun, and Archdevil Venerable Shi had formed their own natures, and they only stopped after an hour. Xiaohua pondered for a moment and understood. Not to mention that Reverend Yun was different from the Dragon Clan in the Three Mainlands, and Archdevil Venerable Shi was different from the ordinary Devil Clan. Even Daoist Witch had formed his own natures after devouring a lot of ruined souls. What was more special was that each of the three clones had formed different laws, which affected each other. That was why they had formed such a huge commotion. As for why the three clones had only formed their own natures now, it must be because Wen Chu had formed his human nature first and triggered the laws of heaven and earth, which affected the three clones at the same time. After everything quieted down, the 9 Fortune Gate patriarchs sat down on their jade chairs. Xiaohua opened his mouth. "First, congratulations to fellow Daoists, but this humble Daoist still has some words to say. We are born from the same roots, and we are closer than Fortune Gate's disciples. Although our cultivation paths are different, we must not fight against each other. Don't worry, big brother." Archdevil Venerable Shi smiled and said, "Although little brother and Wen Chu do not get along well, little brother didn't dare to fight with Wen Chu before. But from today onwards, little brother suddenly discovered that little brother and Wen Chu's minds are connected, and it is impossible for us to fight. Moreover..." Speaking to hear, Demon Venerable Shi smiled and said, "Isn't big brother still the leader?" How could little brother and the others dare to disobey? Archdevil Venerable Shi was right. He was different from Xiao Hua's other clones, as he was refined using the blood shadow art of the Devil clan. In fact, he couldn't be considered as Xiao Hua's true clone. But because of his trip to the upper realm, he had coincidentally obtained the energy essence and devoured the Devil Formation's devil spirit, which allowed him to become one of Xiao Hua's clones. Now that even he could coexist peacefully with Wen Chu, Xiao Hua was relieved. Moreover, after Wen Chu and the other clones became adults, they would be able to communicate with each other just like Xiao Hua before. Although Xiao Hua felt that they had been separated, in reality, Xiao Hua was also clear that he still had the ability to control these clones. Fellow Daoists, I came out. If I don't believe in fellow Daoists, doesn't that mean I don't believe in myself? Xiao Hua smiled and said, I was just reminding everyone. Don't worry, fellow Daoist, we understand. We are bound together for good or ill. The clones also agreed with a smile. Although each of them had different appearances, their smiles were the same. Seeing everyone smiles, Xiao Hua couldn't help but smile as well. He had cultivated the Green Hill sex transformation technique, and his clones had also gained some benefits. Now, even if he faced the Vairocana Buddha, Xiao Hua was confident that he wouldn't let anyone see through his disguise. As for the Two Purities Temple's master, because he was the Sword Heart Seed's master, Xiao Hua had to be on guard. Then, Xiao Hua said, after the battle at Chaomuya, our fortune gate has shown its prowess. From now on, no one will dare to provoke our fortune gate. However, this Xiao has two doubts about this battle. Oh. What doubts does fellow Daoist have? Daoist Yun didn't participate in the battle, so he asked curiously. Xiao Hua looked at Wen Chu and said, in this battle, although the four big families sent out 900,000 disciples, including Dongfang Qianghao, Shimen Jianzhong, Nangang Tian, and Baiming Chou Qing, and dozens of 9th grade Essence Force Wen sages, and the battle was fierce, but now that I think about it, the four big families seem to have taken advantage of the situation. Each family has more than 200,000 disciples, right? Although my fortune gate has become extremely powerful, it is still far from enough to contend against the four big families with just the strength of my fortune gate alone. Even if our fortune gate's strength is enough to resist the Nangang family, I can still laugh secretly. Give it a tip, and thank you for all your support. Chapter 46-31. Fellow Daoists, don't forget how long the four great clans have existed. How many years have they been plotting in the hidden immortal continent? How many years has it been since our fortune gate rose? Moreover, the four patriarchs didn't seem to have used their full strength. Wen Chu, celestial being, lightning immortal, what do you think? Fellow Daoist is right. Wen Chu pondered for a moment and said, that Dongfang Qianghao did use some powerful methods, but it would be a joke to say that this was Dongfang Qianghao's most powerful method. Dongfang Qianghao definitely didn't use his full strength. Of course he didn't use his full strength. Lightning Immortal disagreed with Xiao Hua's opinion and said, didn't we also not use our full strength? We all know that this is Immortal Emperor Go Chen's plan, who would really fight to the death. But the problem is. Celestial being pretended to be deep in thought and said, the four great clans' goal is fellow Daoist Wen Chu's 5 Qi unification art. Didn't they just risk their lives to capture fellow Daoist Wen Chu? Oh, wasn't that saint at the end the most powerful method of the four great clans? How can you say that they didn't use their full strength? Hee, if you put it that way, it makes sense. Wen Chu nodded and said with a smile, after all, they have 2 saint statues, which is enough to suppress all literary stars. They don't need to put in more effort in other aspects. Unfortunately, they miscalculated. Xiao Hua said with a smile, the heaven-defying lightning phoenix is the great saint of the starry sky, the star of 10,000 stars, the saint of 10,000 saints. Fellow Daoist Wen Chu is a saint literary star. How can the four great clans' half-saint literary stars compare to her? Ha ha ha, exactly. The group of clones laughed in unison. How can our fortune gate's third old master be compared to the four great clans? After everyone finished laughing, Xiao Hua waved his hand and said, although this battle was strange, it's already over, so let's not talk about it. I will talk about my second doubt. Fellow Daoist, please speak. Lightning Immortal rushed to ask, as if he was as human as Wuxia Xianxia said, I's second doubt is about the 4 great clan saint statues. Wuxia clapped and praised, good. Fellow Daoist, you are indeed meticulous. You are the saint who disappeared among the Confucian cultivators. Even with my current cultivation, I don't know where this saint disappeared to. Now that he suddenly appeared in the saint statue of the 4 great families of the hidden immortal continent, it really gave me a shock. I am a very mysterious saint. Xiaohua looked at the puzzled faces of the Thunderbolt Immortal and the others and explained, of course, it can also be said that the Confucian cultivators can avoid him, making him disappear from the sight of the Confucian cultivators and the world. Strange. Why is that? Sage Thunderbolt asked. Xiaohua muttered to himself for a moment, then said regretfully, in the ancient records of Confucian cultivators, there are very few records about Laozi. However, even these few records are extremely important, making people feel extremely shocked. Xiaohua explained, Laozi wrote 37 chapters of the Tao chapter and 44 chapters of the Virtue chapter. Together, they were called the Tao Te Ching. The Tao Te Ching was known as the king of all scriptures in some ancient books. The Tao that can be spoken of is not the Tao. Names can be named, but not names. This is a famous saying in the Tao Te Ching. However, this famous Tao Te Ching, the hidden immortal continent, only has its name and no book. No one knows what is written in it. Laozi left behind 10 precepts. Now, only, if things succeed, the common people will naturally follow me. The way of the saint is not to fight. If a man does not fight, no one in the world can fight against him, knowing when to stop leads to disaster. If a man does not overflow, he can cover up and make new achievements. Those who know others are wise, those who know themselves are bright. Those who win are powerful, those who win are strong, do nothing, governing a country is like cooking a small fish. These 6 precepts, no one knows what the other 4 precepts are. Wuxia also continued to explain, and the most important thing is that there are records in the history books that the Confucian cultivator, sage Confucius, once treated Laozi as a teacher. It is this very important saint in the history of Confucian cultivators, but he did not leave behind any doctrine or school. Within the 100 schools of thought, there is no trace of Laozi. Xiaohua said with a smile, fellow Daoists, don't you think this is strange? Very strange indeed. Lightning Reverend answered first, as if he had already regained his humanity. Oh, by the way, fellow immortal Wuxia. Xiaohua suddenly thought of something and asked, do you still remember what the saints were chanting when their statues appeared? I think it's. You may be named, but you are not named in Hanga Pass? Wuxia also seemed to be unable to remember clearly, and answered with uncertainty. Hanga Pass. Xiaohua nodded, yes, that's the place. If we can find Hanga Pass, we should be able to find the reason why this saint disappeared. I don't think there is such a name in hidden immortal continent. Wuxia shook his head, I've read the records in the immortal palace, but there is no record of this either. Hee. Reverend Yun laughed, not all Confucian saints are from hidden immortal continent, so this Hanga Pass might not exist in hidden immortal continent. What does a missing saint have to do with us? Let's talk about it when we have the opportunity in the future. Fellow Daoist, you are right. Xiaohua nodded, let's cultivate in silence for now. After the sutra seeking of extreme bliss is over, Reverend Yun will take charge of the Fortune Palace, and we will go and see old man Gaochen's face. Good. Wuxia clapped his hands, fellow immortal Lei Ting and I have always wanted to listen to the heavenly Tao and Karma talk. Let's part ways here. After saying that, Wuxia and Reverend Lei Ting's figures swayed and entered the space, where they continued to cultivate and comprehend. Seeing the two leaving, Honorable Demon Shi and the others also bid farewell to Xiaohua and entered the space. Seeing his avatars cultivating, Xiaohua also sat cross-legged on a jade chair. He frowned as he looked at the gloomy sky outside the Fortune Tao Palace. A kind of confusion, a kind of worry, and a kind of homesickness quietly rose in him. A mountain range was like an old bull that had been working all day, lying on the ground and resting. It looked very heavy and majestic. The setting sun hung diagonally in the west, and rays of multicolored light spread across the sky. Today's dusk looked a little different from usual. Auspicious clouds hovered in the sky, and no matter how the wind urged them, they could not move their feet. A faint chanting sound was born in the wind. It was like the chanting of 100 suns, but also like the chanting of 10,000 Buddhas. Dang dang. In the sound of the wooden fish, there were also scattered starlight that couldn't help but scatter down first. Facing the blood-like light and shadow, a vigorous figure shook. This mountain range was naturally the Crouching Bull Mountain Range outside the immortal town. It was also the place where Xiao Hua, Lu Yi, Yuanya, and Xiao Jian passed by when he was forced to leave the immortal town. At this moment, a few more figures walked over from the darkened path. The one in the front was the fire ape, holding a magic wand in his hand. While walking, he shaded his eyes with his hand and looked forward. Behind him was a monk who seemed to be walking unsteadily. The monk looked tired, but his eyes were very bright, like stars in the night sky. Behind the monk was a weak white horse. On the horse's back was an incomparably huge pig. The pig was snoring with its head facing the sky. A fist-sized air bubble was expanding and shrinking in its nostrils as it snored. Behind the white horse was a Confucian cultivator wearing a battle robe. On his shoulder was a crescent moon shovel, and on the two ends of the crescent moon shovel were two huge bags. Wasn't this group of people Chun Zong and his disciple from the sutra seeking extreme bliss? Master. After turning around the mountain path, a small town appeared in front of them, and a long river flowed from one side of the town. Jin Kong, who was in the front, put down his hand, turned around and walked a few steps, supporting the staggering Chun Zong, and said with a smile, "The immortal town is in front. Master, you only need to walk for another hour, and this sutra seeking extreme bliss will come to an end." Although Jin Kong was smiling, his smile was a little stiff, and he even seemed a little nervous. However, the excitement in his voice came from the bottom of his heart. Of course, there was no surprise in this excitement. After all, he already knew through his divine sense that they would definitely reach the immortal town today. With Jin Kong's support, Chuanzang stopped and let out a long sigh. He raised his hand again and wiped the sweat from his forehead. He turned to look at Jin Kong and said, "Disciple, it's been hard on you along the way." "It's not hard at all." Jin Kong waved his hands and said respectfully, "Disciple was naughty and mischievous before. If I didn't follow Master on this journey, how could I have comprehended Buddhism? Disciple's hard work was cultivation, and Disciple is very happy. Disciple was afraid that I didn't serve Master well enough. Amitabha, Buddha is merciful." Chunzang chanted Buddha's name and said, "The sea of bitterness is boundless, turn back, and the shore is at hand." Disciple, you were able to wake up and turn back in time. This is Buddha's great strength, and it has nothing to do with Master. Yes, Amitabha, Buddha is merciful. Jin Kong imitated Chunzang. He chanted Buddha's name, and he seemed to be doing it. This fire ape really has a change in personality. On the white horse, Jinjia turned around and sat up. Dragon horse Jinfeng didn't wait for Jinjia to raise his hand and immediately turned smaller so that Jinjia could sit more comfortably. However, Jinjia said coldly, "If I didn't see that you were exactly the same as the previous Jin Kong and didn't see anything wrong, I would have thought that you were a fake Jin Kong." Amitabha, Jinjia. Chunzang reprimanded, "People change, let alone Jin Kong who was under my Buddha's light. He followed Master for 300 years, so how could he not have Buddha nature? How could he not focus on Buddha?" Focus on Buddha? Jinjia punched Dragon Horse Jinfeng's buttocks and said with a smile, "What about this scoundrel? He didn't come much later than Jin Kong. Eldest senior brother, I am the Eastern Sea Dragon Palace's 10th prince." Dragon Horse Jinfeng said with a bitter face, "There are still dozens of dragon maidens waiting for me to return and pamper them. If I were to become a monk, what would happen to them?" Chapter 46-32. Shut up. Jinjia roared, whether you enter Buddhism or not has nothing to do with me. If you interrupt me when I'm talking, do you believe that I'll castrate you? Even if you don't enter Buddhism, your group of dragon maidens won't care about you anymore." In an instant, Dragon Horse Shenfeng gritted his teeth, not daring to make a single sound. "Amitabha." Chunzong chanted and bitterly smiled. "Xianxia, you clearly have Buddha in your heart. Why do you always pretend that you don't have Buddha in your mouth?" "That's right, Master. It's fine as long as I have Buddha in my heart. Why do you care where I don't have Buddha?" As Xianxia spoke, he looked up at the sky and sneered, "There are so many people here today." "Let's go, Master." Zhen Kong respectfully said, "Let's quicken our pace. The sun will set soon. Today is almost 300 years since Master left Longevity Town. Stepping into Longevity Town at sunset is the perfect time for my Buddha." "All right." Hearing this, Chunzong was motivated again. He struggled to get up and walked towards Longevity Town. As the sun set, Chunzong and his disciple got closer to Longevity Town. When the afterglow of the setting sun disappeared, the entire land was shrouded in a thin layer of white. Chunzong had one foot in Longevity Town. Boom! At the west side of Longevity Town, a huge Buddha lotus appeared out of thin air. The Buddha radiance shot out from the Buddha lotus, illuminating Longevity Town and Crouching Bull Mountain like the sun. "Amitabha, Amitabha." Chants of Buddha resounded from the Buddha lotus. Dang, dang, dang. The sound of a wooden fish hitting the ground could be heard. Amidst the sounds, the Buddha lotus slowly bloomed, and 9 colors shot into the sky. Within the 9 colors, heavenly dragons danced, heavenly maidens bounced back, and heavenly flowers fell from the sky. Scenes of Buddhas and small kiliacosms were born and extinguished in the light. Namo Amitabha. With a loud Buddhist chant, the Namo Dipankara archaic Buddha world exalted revealed his Buddha form from the void. In front of him, the Namo Wisdom Manjushri Bodhisattva placed his palms together with a smile on his face. Behind the Buddha and Bodhisattva, there seemed to be countless arhats, giants, and other Dharma protectors accompanying them. Boom! Just as the Western Buddha Lord appeared, a clear sound came from the eastern horizon. A colorful cloud covered the eastern sky, and thousands of auspicious signs hung on the 4 sides of the cloud. Auspicious signs surged, dragons and phoenixes appeared, and the sounds of students chanting resounded through the sky. Along with this chanting, fist-sized inscriptions appeared one after another, condensing into words, sentences, articles in midair, and finally turning into a mountain of books and a sea of words. With the appearance of the mountain of books and sea of literature, a majestic pillar of energy descended from the void. Amidst the vibrations, Immortal Emperor Go-Chen appeared on top of the 5-colored clouds with his emperor's robe and the emperor's sword hanging by his waist. As soon as Immortal Emperor Go-Chen appeared, a dragon-shaped providence rushed out from the Longevity Town and circled around Immortal Emperor Go-Chen a few times. Then, it turned into a seat and landed below him. As Immortal Emperor Go-Chen sat down, Tai Bai Jinxing, who held a horsetail whisk, and Sun Jian, who held a 3-pointed, double-edged saber appeared beside him. Around the clouds, the generals of the Sun Palace also appeared with their weapons in their hands. Boom! With the appearance of the Eastern Immortal Emperor, another loud rumble came from the north of the Longevity Town. At this time, the northern horizon was filled with stars, and countless pillars of light descended, shaking the entire sky. Under the stars and moon, 2 demon race great sages that were several thousand feet tall appeared. Weren't they the heaven-defying Thunder Phoenix and the Golden Rock? As soon as the 2 demon race great sages appeared, the starlight within 100 miles instantly gathered. Although they didn't bring any other demon race members, nor did they have the Immortal Palace or the Thunder Monastery ceremonial guards, the starlight was like an ocean, revolving around the 2 great sages' bodies in a profound manner. The majestic and boundless aura they exuded was comparable to the Immortal Palace and the Buddhist sect. Amitabha. Greetings, benefactors. The Dipankara archaic Buddha placed his palms together and bowed. This emperor greets you as well. Immortal Emperor Go-Chen stood up from his seat and bowed. The Phoenix Sage and the Rock Sage transformed into their human forms and bowed as well, Greetings, everyone. After the Confucians, Buddhists, and demons of the 3 continents finished their greetings, Immortal Emperor Go-Chen spoke again. 300 years ago, we watched Xuanzang begin his Nirvana Sutra seeking. Now, 300 years later, we've personally come to the Longevity Town to welcome Xuanzang's triumphant return. 300 years have passed in the blink of an eye. TSK. The Golden Rock said with disdain, Old man Go-Chen, stop showing off your literary talent. 300 years is merely 300 days to your immortal palace. Of course, you'd feel that it's only a blink of an eye. Haha. The immortal Emperor Go-Chen smiled and didn't mind. The Golden Rock looked at the Dipankara archaic Buddha world and mocked, Old man Dipankara, where's Mahavairakana? I heard that he had a falling out with the Maitreya Buddha. Is he too ashamed to come to the Longevity Town? Amitba. The Dipankara archaic Buddha world exalt placed his palms together and said with an expressionless face, Rock Sage, you're wrong. The Mahavairakana Buddha world exalt is currently comprehending the withering glory Buddhism and has no time to come. Moreover, the Mahavairakana Buddha world exalt is the current Buddha Lord. Ever since Xuanzang stepped into the Longevity Town, the Nirvana Sutra seeking had already become a thing of the past. Since the past has passed, it's only natural for me, the past Buddha Lord, to come and welcome him. Why is there a need for the current Buddha Lord to come? What are you talking about? The rock sage waved his hand and said, if that's the case, the Nirvana Sutra seeking is a thing of the past. However, the Buddha light illumination is a thing of the future. You should let the Maitreya Buddha come. Why didn't you let him come? Are you unable to order him around? Forget it, forget it. Immortal Emperor Go-Chen hurriedly tried to smooth things over. He smiled and said, today's main character is Xuanzang. He has walked for 300 years, and his merit has reached perfection. Boom. Before Immortal Emperor Go-Chen could finish his words, another thunderous boom resounded from the southern horizon of the Longevity Town. This thunderous boom was so loud that it shook the earth and the mountains. Then, a huge bolt of lightning flickered in the sky. Within the lightning, Xiaohua, who was dressed in a Daoist robe, walked over. Xiaohua's figure had already revealed itself. Within a radius of several hundred kilometers, lightning surged out like a tide. The thunderbolts within the lightning were like dancing dragons and spiraling phoenixes. Layers upon layers of life and death phenomena rushed out from the flickering thunderbolts, transforming into obscure fluctuations that were extremely mysterious as they spread out in all directions. Within the ripples, the Thunder Reverend, Wen Chu, and the heavenly being stepped out. As soon as the 3 of them appeared, another sky-piercing aura surged towards them. How can my fortune gate not participate in such a grand occasion? Xiaohua stood in midair and said proudly. Greetings, Dragon Master Xiao. The golden-winged Great Peng did not dare to be negligent and saluted first. His posture was completely different from before. Feng Wu also smiled and bowed. It has only been a few days. Greetings, fellow Daoist Xiao. Greetings, Sage Peng and Sage Feng. This Xiao greets you. Xiaohua smiled and bowed in return. Oh, so it's Master Xiao. Immortal Emperor Go-Chen slapped his forehead and laughed. This emperor forgot that the Longevity Town is in Yu Province. Your soaring Dragon Mountain Range is also in Yu Province. Master Xiao should also come and observe the ceremony. Greetings, Immortal Emperor. Xiaohua looked at Immortal Emperor Go-Chen and said with a fake smile, this Xiao has not seen Immortal Emperor for a few days. I miss you. AI, yes. Immortal Emperor Go-Chen's skin was unusually thick. He acted as if nothing had happened and said with a smile, it has only been half a day since we parted at the southern heavenly gate. This emperor has already missed you. Master Xiao, why don't you stay in my immortal palace as well? That won't do. Xiaohua waved his hand and said, this Xiao has no virtue and can't lead the scholars. If the immortal emperor is interested, why don't you invite the 4 great families to stay? This emperor thinks so too. Immortal Emperor Go-Chen knew what Xiaohua was talking about. Unfortunately, he still pretended not to know and said with a smile, it's a pity that they feel that my immortal palace is too small to accommodate them. Greetings, Dipankara Archaic Buddha. Xiaohua could not be bothered with immortal Emperor Go Chen and cupped his hands towards the Dipankara Archaic Buddha. This old monk greets Daoist Xiao. The Dipankara Archaic Buddha returned the greeting and said, "This old monk thanks Daoist for coming to the longevity town to observe the ceremony." Well said, well said. Seeing that the Dipankara Archaic Buddha didn't welcome him and spoke with a cold tone, Xiaohua naturally knew that the Dipankara Archaic Buddha already knew about Jinjia and Jinkong's origins and even knew that he was good friends with the Maitreya Buddha. He was just casually saying this and was about to look at Chunzong. At this moment, the golden-winged great rock seemed to have noticed something and suddenly shouted, "Old man Go Chen, isn't this scholar the owner of your immortal palace's literature palace? Why is he standing beside Daoist Xiao?" The golden-winged great rock was purposely making things difficult for immortal Emperor Go Chen. However, immortal Emperor Go Chen smiled and said, "The owner of the literature palace is good friends with Master Xiao. They want to find the heavenly punishment prison crystal that this emperor used to imprison Xian. Therefore, this emperor allowed the owner of the literature palace to help Master Xiao." "Oh, Go Chen, you're really heartless. Back then, the 9th princess only made a small mistake. Even now, you still haven't let her out?" The golden-winged great rock laughed and said, "Is the 9th princess your biological daughter? Xian made a mistake and violated the immortal law. Even if she's my daughter, this emperor still has to punish her." Immortal Emperor Go Chen said seriously, "This emperor will use virtue to conquer the world and rule the world." "Your Majesty." At this moment, Taibai Jinxing, who was sitting in front of immortal Emperor Go Chen, suddenly appeared and bowed. "This old subject has something to say." Immortal Emperor Go Chen was stunned. He looked at Taibai Jinxing and nodded, "Please speak." Taibai Jinxing smiled and said, "The 9th princess was originally in the wrong. After being imprisoned by your Majesty for hundreds of years, the suffering she suffered was already enough to make up for her previous sins. Moreover, this huge mistake has been made up for, and the 5 Qis unification art has reached perfection. In addition, today, Chunzong brought his disciples back to the longevity town, and the sutra seeking extreme happiness has also reached perfection. My immortal palace can be considered to have 2 simultaneous blessings. Today, this old subject boldly requests your Majesty to let the 9th princess out. Isn't this a good thing? Vote, gift, and thank you for all your support. Chapter 46-33. Humph. Immortal Emperor Go Chen snorted. Instead of looking at Taibai Jinxing, he looked at Xiaohua and said coldly, "Although Xian's sins have been reduced, a few hundred years isn't enough for her to repent. Let's talk about this later." "Oh?" Taibai Jinxing was stunned. He looked at immortal Emperor Go Chen in confusion and hurriedly said respectfully, "Yes, I understand. I didn't think as thoroughly as your Majesty. I was wrong." Old Go Chen. Xiaohua was truly gnashing his teeth. Taibai Jinxing was good at guessing the emperor's will, so he must have seen something, or perhaps he received a hint from the empress. Thus, he used the grand occasion of sutra seeking in extreme bliss to ask immortal Emperor Go Chen to pardon Xian. However, immortal Emperor Go Chen obviously wanted to make things difficult for him, so he did not agree. Xiaohua regretted his uninvited visit. However, just as he was cursing in his heart and was about to speak, he looked at the ground again. At this moment, Chunzong and the others were standing in the longevity town. The ground was already covered with yellow soil, and the streets were filled with clean water. They were looking at Xiaohua and the others in a daze. Seeing the hardships on Chuanzong's face, and even the fine lines at the corners of his eyes and the slight knife-like wrinkles between his brows, Xiaohua's heart ached. He instantly thought of the child in his mother's arms in front of Yellow Flower Ridge. His thoughts of competing with immortal Emperor Go Chen had already dissipated. Today's main character was Jianghu. From today onwards, he would have the time and strength to compete with Go Chen. "Chunzong, you've worked hard," Xiaohua said with a smile. Chunzong opened his mouth but didn't say anything. He nodded slightly towards Xiaohua and put his palms together before kneeling towards the Dipankara archaic Buddha. Namo Amitabha, disciple Chun Zong greets the Dipankara archaic Buddha. 300 years ago, disciple obeyed my Buddha's decree and went to the Thunder Temple to obtain the Mahayana Buddhist scripture Sanzang. I have taken in 4 disciples along the way, namely Jin Kong, Jin Han, Jin Feng, and Jin Jie. Under the escort of these 4 disciples, I walked from the town of Longevity to the Thunderclap Temple, and from the Thunderclap Temple back to the town of Longevity. Throughout the journey, I have not used any of my powers and have relied solely on my own strength. I have completed my Buddha's decree and obtained the Sanzang Buddhist scripture to the town of Longevity. Now, I have submitted the decree to the Dipankara archaic Buddha, the World Lord, for inspection. May my Buddha's light illuminate the hidden immortal continent. Amitabha. Seeing how Chuanzang ignored Xiaohua and immortal Emperor Go Chen and only kowtowed to him, the Dipankara archaic Buddha smiled faintly and chanted, Chuanzang, you've worked hard and contributed greatly. You've nourished the world with Buddhism essence like rain. However, if you want to talk about handing over the edict, it seems that you shouldn't hand it over here. You should hand it over at the place where you got it. The Buddhist edict. Amitabha, this disciple will follow the teachings of the Dipankara archaic Buddha. Chuanzang came to a realization. After kowtowing, he stood up and looked at his disciples, who were only bowing respectfully, and said, Disciples, follow your master to the River Tide Temple. Yes, master. All the disciples answered carefully. Not to mention Jinkong, even Jinjie had restrained his wildness and covered most of his face with his 2 big ears. Not bad, not bad. Xiaohua didn't know what the others were thinking. However, seeing how Jinkong's previous arrogance had disappeared, Xiaohua felt a little happy. While the heaven-pacifying staff wasn't as heaven-defying as the 5 elements wishful heaven-reaching staff, it was still a powerful weapon. Xiaohua didn't want to let a fire ape, who had a murderous heart, use it to create trouble for himself. Seeing how Jinkong was behaving, Xiaohua started making plans. Jinkong is a fire ape. It isn't appropriate for him to become a disciple of Yuanya. After Jinkong obtains the Buddha fruit, I'll let him enter my fortune gate. Chuanzang measured his final merit step by step. With the Buddhists, Daoists, Confucians, and demons guarding the Longevity town, there probably wasn't anyone in this world who could stop the final step of the sutra seeking extreme bliss. However, right at this moment, in the south, where Xiaohua came from, another rumbling sound resounded. From the horizon, a rainbow bridge several miles long rushed over from the darkened sky. This rainbow bridge was different from the usual ones as it was black and white. Every time the black and white rainbow bridge rushed over the horizon, a chi explosion would occur. The chi explosion was continuous like the beating of a drum. When the rainbow bridge got closer, 3 cultivators appeared on the rainbow bridge. The one in front was dressed in emperor's attire and wore a dark yellow crown on his head. Of the 2 cultivators behind him, the one on the left was dressed in a bright yellow Daoist robe with a feathered crown on his head. He had a tall stature and an ancient face, and he held a 5-colored jade scepter in his hand. The one on the right was dressed in a dark yellow Daoist robe. He had snow-white hair, and his eyes were like lightning. He had an arrogant expression on his face, and his hands were placed behind his back. He was like a shadow following behind the emperor-attired cultivator. This person patted his head, and 2 black and white light pillars shot into the sky. A huge black and white dome appeared in the sky, and the aura of a supreme cultivator surged towards the Longevity town like a tsunami. Oh! Why is it him? The Gochin Immortal Emperor, the golden-winged Great Rock, and the Dipankara archaic Buddha were puzzled. They didn't know when a supreme cultivator had appeared in the hidden immortal mainland. When the cultivator in front revealed himself, the 3 of them were shocked. They looked at each other and had the same thought. Xiaohua looked at the newcomer coldly. This face and aura were the same as the one he saw in the light projection when he came out of the Star Moon Palace. Now that he saw the black and white light pillar, how could Xiaohua not know that this was the primordial chaos ancestor? However, Xiaohua and the Gochin Immortal Emperor were equally shocked. When others entered the Star Moon Palace, they would only have the opportunity to become a literary saint. This primordial chaos ancestor, on the other hand, had directly reached the Mahayana realm. Moreover, looking at his body, he must have obtained the opportunity in the Star Moon Palace. This guy's luck is pretty good. Xiao Hua curled his lips and muttered, even this old man is jealous of him. When he looked at the primordial chaos ancestor and saw the shocked expressions on the experts' faces, he felt proud of himself. In his heart, he was the one who had benefited the most from this trip to the Star Moon Palace. Damn it. Before the primordial chaos ancestor could speak, the Gochin immortal emperor glared at the cultivator in the bright yellow Daoist robe and said, Daoist rider Crane, you left the Penglai immortal realm without permission and violated the immortal palace's laws. How dare you appear before me? Daoist rider Crane? Xiao Hua rolled his eyes and immediately understood that the cultivator holding the jade scepter was the Daoist rider Crane from the Lianghui Ridge who was ranked second on the Xianhuang list. His cultivation had already reached the mid-stage of the tribulation passing stage and was indeed more powerful than Xiao Hua's disciples. He was qualified to occupy the second position. After hearing the Gochin immortal emperor's reprimand, Daoist rider Crane's gaze swept across indifferently. He did not even have the interest to open his mouth and immediately closed his eyes again. Go Chen. The primordial chaos ancestor in front laughed and said, although your Penglai immortal realm is called an immortal realm, it's actually a prison that imprisons the experts of our Taoism. If not for the fear of being hunted down by the immortal palace, who would be willing to stay in there? Who in the sky-bearing palace would be afraid of your immortal palace? Just wait and see, other than Daoist rider Crane, there will be more Taoism cultivators who will leave the Penglai immortal realm and join my sky-bearing palace. The Gochin immortal emperor's face flashed with brilliance and said coldly, if that's the case, then I'll cut the weeds and eliminate the roots to avoid future troubles. Is that so? Since you have such thoughts, then please. The primordial chaos ancestor displayed his unscrupulous nature and laughed, go ahead and attack. The more you kill, the more they will submit to me. The Gochin immortal emperor glanced at Xiao Hua and laughed, if it was in the past, your sky-bearing palace might be their only choice. But now? From what I see, the Fortune Gate is my immortal palace's only strong opponent. The sky-bearing palace that you just built is not even comparable to a single hair of the Fortune Gate. Old man Go Chen. The primordial chaos ancestor laughed loudly. He looked at Xiao Hua and said, don't show off such childish tricks here. The sowing discord in your words is too strong. It's not worthy of your identity as an immortal emperor. This old man has seen Daoist Xiao before and also saw the blood steel of his Taoism, in the Bronze Pillar country. This old man is very gratified. After this old man was suppressed, my Taoism has risen again. The special thing is that Daoist Xiao's cultivation far surpasses this old man's, and his Fortune Gate is famous in the 3 continents. It is also the flag of my Taoism. If possible, this old man is willing to cooperate with the Fortune Gate with my sky-bearing palace. For the glory of my Taoism, this old man is willing to make any sacrifice. This old man is willing to fight against the immortals and Buddhas to the end, even if I am suppressed again. The primordial chaos ancestor's words were very passionate, but Xiao Hua felt that it was a joke. If the primordial chaos ancestor was willing to make sacrifices, why would he need to build the sky-bearing palace? However, the current Xiao Hua was not the Xiao Hua of the past. He laughed and said, Daoist primordial chaos ancestor, this Xiao's thoughts are different from yours. This Xiao believes that whether it is the Confucian cultivators, the Buddhist sect, the Taoism, or even the demon race, they are all ants under the heavenly Tao. They are all cultivators who cultivate for their own goals. Our enemies are the heavens, the earth, and the heavenly Tao. Not each other. If you put yourself in a position of opposition to the Confucian cultivators and the Buddhist sect, wouldn't the Taoism be the mortal enemy of the Confucian cultivators and the Buddhist sect? How can my Taoism prosper? The primordial chaos ancestor's face turned ugly, and he frowned and said, Daoist Xiao, have you not heard of the saying, people who walk different paths cannot work together? My Taoism's cultivation is different from that of the Confucian cultivators and the Buddhist sect. How can we coexist? It is precisely because they are different that we can coexist. Xiao Hua said curiously, if there is competition, then it will not be easy to coexist. Moreover. Speaking until here, Xiao Hua looked at the Scholar Palace beside him and smiled. This is the Scholar Palace's master, and also this Zhao's good friend. When we cultivate, we often verify what we have learned with each other. The Taoism and Confucian cultivators are actually interconnected in many areas. Only by referring to each other can we improve together.